I should have known better. I thought I had forgotten it. The smell of the salt in the air, the creaking of old wood beneath heavy boots, the hum of the engine cutting through a quiet evening breeze. I thought I'd outgrown it. But the truth is, some places don't let you forget, and some memories are made of things you can't outrun. It had been 20 years. I thought that was long enough to move on, to stop hearing the same whisper when the wind blew just right, or seeing that same silhouette by the water. But the thing about memories, they have a way of pulling you back, and sometimes they bring you to the very places you promised yourself you'd never return. I should have stayed home that summer, should have just kept driving like I told myself, but instead, I found myself on the road back to the place where it all started. The place my father disappeared. The dock at the edge of Clearwater Bay. The drive felt endless, not because it was far, no, the miles weren't the problem. It was the quiet that came with each turn, the kind of quiet that presses on your chest. You can feel it like the thud of your own heartbeat. The road was as long as the years, and it wasn't just the distance I was traveling, it was the weight of what I had left behind. The feeling that everything I thought was behind me had only been waiting for me to come back. I don't know why I didn't turn around. Maybe it was the pull of the place, or maybe it was my mind playing tricks. But there I was, pulling off the main road, the rusting sign of the old dock barely hanging on anymore, half obscured by the creeping vines. The overgrown path to the water seemed like a thin line between the past and the present. The dock was just as I remembered, familiar in a way that made my heart race. The same rickety planks that creaked under my feet as a boy. The same slats of weathered wood that had become part of my childhood memory, a place of peace, of time spent with my father. The same ropes, the same faded boat, the one my father used to take me out on, where we fished for hours, talking about everything and nothing. But standing there now, it didn't feel like the same place. The air was different. Heavier, thick. The sun was starting to dip beneath the horizon, casting everything in that soft orange glow that could almost convince you everything was all right. But I knew better. I knew this place, this dock, and something had changed. I didn't know why I had returned, only that I had to. Maybe it was because I had never gotten an answer. Maybe it was because something deep down had never let me leave, even when I tried. But now, with the boat in front of me, the silence stretched longer than I had expected, longer than it should have. I hesitated at the edge of the dock, where the same old ropes dangled from the post. I should have turned back right then. I should have gotten back in the truck and driven away from this place where my father had vanished all those years ago. But no, I couldn't do that. I had to find out. I walked towards the boat, the sun sinking lower, stretching shadows across the water. It was exactly like that day. The same position, the same stretch of quiet that felt far too loud. As I neared the boat, I could feel the old familiarity settle into me like an old, forgotten ache. I didn't realize how much I'd missed the sound of the water gently lapping against the dock. But as I stepped closer, I noticed something else, something I hadn't expected. The boat wasn't just the same. It was waiting. The same boat my father had loved, but now it looked wrong. The faded paint was peeling in places that didn't make sense. The ropes, twisted as they had been so many times before, hung too still, too perfect, too untouched. I reached out for the ropes, the familiar movement so instinctive it startled me, and that's when I heard it, a creak. Soft at first, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. Something was shifting behind me. I spun around, my heart slamming into my chest as the cool wind picked up, swirling around me, carrying the distant sound of something like a whisper. The dock was empty. Just like it had been that day. I couldn't stop myself. I had to get in. I climbed into the boat, the wood creaking under my weight, and as I sat down, the boat shifted. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make my pulse spike. It felt wrong. The stillness of the water was unnatural, the way it reflected the sky too perfectly. And then I noticed something else, A small, almost imperceptible ripple in the water right beneath the surface. Something was moving. Something was there. My mind was racing as I pulled at the ropes, trying to start the engine. The old boat sputtered to life, but it didn't sound right. It sounded like it had been waiting for me all along, like it had been prepared for this moment when I would return. The waves picked up slightly as I pushed away from the dock. The water that had once seemed so peaceful now felt like it was pushing against me, pulling me deeper, farther from shore. It was as if the lake itself had begun to push back. My hands gripped the edge of the boat, but I couldn't stop staring at the dock. It was still there, quiet, almost mocking in its stillness. The sun was gone now, the last light of day fading into that uncomfortable dusk. Then I saw it, a figure. It was there, standing at the end of the dock, the figure of a man, silhouetted against the sky. Tall, unmoving, the last light of the day catching just enough to make out the outline of something familiar, something too familiar. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, the air thickening. It was him. I knew it was. I knew it was my father. But that didn't make sense, did it? I stared, my mind fighting with itself. Was this real? Was I imagining this? No, it wasn't just the memory. It was him. I could see him. He was real. But how? He was dead. He had disappeared that day, like the day we went out on the water and never came back. The day I waited for him to return, and he never did. I couldn't look away. But as the boat drifted farther into the darkening water, the figure didn't move. It didn't shift or call out. It just stood there, staring back at me. A whisper of the past, stretching into the present. I tried to turn the boat around, to head back to the dock, but the engine sputtered again, as if it was resisting. I looked over my shoulder and saw the figure no longer standing at the dock. He was walking towards the boat. My heart raced. Something wasn't right. The boat jerked again. This time I heard the unmistakable sound of something splashing in the water. Something large, something close, too close. I turned around, but there was nothing behind me but the endless black water. No ripples, no splashes, no sign of anything moving beneath the surface, except for the pull. The pull of the dock, the pull of my father's shadow. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, heart pounding, as I clutched the sides of the boat, trying to steady myself. Every instinct screamed at me to turn the engine back on, to get out of there, but the pull of the dock, the pull of that figure, kept me frozen in place. I could feel it, the slow weight of the silence pressing down, the kind that fills a space so thick you can't breathe through it. The water was as dark as night now, the surface broken only by the occasional ripple that made my nerves flare up each time. My hands trembled on the worn-out ropes, my mouth dry as I glanced back, my eyes straining in the darkening light. That figure, that shadow, was still there, still moving toward me. And then, without warning, a voice cut through the night, a low, hoarse whisper. "Come back." I froze. The voice was unmistakable, and yet it wasn't. It sounded like my father's voice, but strained, like it was coming from under the water, a thing half drowned. The wind picked up again, blowing sharply against my face, like the lake itself was trying to drive me back. But I couldn't look away. My mind, my instincts, they were all telling me to leave, to run, to get out of this cursed place. But my body refused to listen. "Come back," the voice repeated, clearer this time. It was too familiar, too real, and I could feel it in my bones, like a stone dropped deep in my gut. The words had weight. They held meaning beyond just sound, as though they were pulling at something inside of me. Something I hadn't wanted to confront, something I had buried years ago. My father hadn't disappeared, had he? I always thought that was the story. He had vanished. But what if he hadn't? I felt a flash of memory, the last time I had seen him, that day on the boat. The sun hanging heavy in the sky, the warm wind in our faces, the sound of the water lapping against the hull. But something had felt wrong then, too. There had been something in his eyes, something distant, something off. A look I hadn't understood at the time, and then he was gone, just like that, without a word, without a trace. But now, as the boat drifted slowly back toward the dock, I couldn't shake the feeling that my father wasn't just lost. He was waiting for me. My hands tightened on the ropes again, and I could hear the scraping sound of them against the wood as I pulled the boat closer, driven by some force I couldn't explain. Come back. The voice was almost a command now. I glanced toward the dock once more, my breath catching in my throat as I saw the figure again, closer this time, standing on the edge, too close. There was no mistaking it. It was him, but it wasn't. The man standing there was too tall, too still, like he didn't belong in this world at all. A hollow shadow of the man I had known. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream, to shout, to ask him why. But the words wouldn't come. It was like my throat was choked with the same salt water that surrounded the boat. Instead, I rowed slowly forward, my hands pulling at the oars with an unnatural calm. Something was making me do it. Something I didn't want to listen to, but couldn't stop. As I reached the dock, I saw the ropes again, the same fraying ropes, now unnaturally still, as though they too were waiting for something. I stepped onto the dock, the wood groaning beneath my weight. The figure in front of me was almost solid now, and yet, when I tried to focus, he seemed to blur, like smoke swirling in the wind. And then, just as I reached out to grab the post, everything went dark. A soft, unnatural quiet fell over the water, and for a moment, I thought I was imagining it, the sound of something else beneath the water. Not the splashes of fish, not the gentle lapping of the shore, but something deeper, something older, something alive. I staggered back, the darkness around me swallowing the last remnants of daylight. I could feel the weight of the air, thicker now, suffocating, pressing in on me. The dock creaked again, but this time it wasn't the sound of old wood. No, this was something more, a groan of something ancient, as if the very ground beneath me was protesting, warning me. I spun around, trying to find a way back, but everything looked the same. The dock had changed. It was no longer just a place of childhood memories. It had become something else, something that didn't want me to leave. The boat was gone. I didn't understand. Where had it gone? One moment it was there, rocking gently in the water, and now, nothing. Just the empty stretch of dark water, the silent whisper of the wind. "Dad?" I whispered, my voice shaking, unsure if I was talking to the figure or to the memory. "Where are you?" There was no answer, only the soft lapping of the water. But something was different now. I could feel it in my bones. Something was wrong. It was as if the place had shifted, as if the world itself had changed, and now I was stuck in a loop, stuck on this dock, a place where nothing ever really leaves. I turned toward the trees behind me, hoping to find a path back to where I had parked the truck. But the shadows between the trunks were too thick, the air too heavy. Something was moving out there. I could feel it, like a presence lurking just beyond my vision, waiting for me to turn my back. "Dad?" I called again, but this time my voice was weaker. There was no answer. I realized then that maybe I had never left. Maybe I had always been here, always circling this place in my dreams, in my thoughts. Maybe I was the one who had disappeared. Maybe I'd been waiting all these years for the moment when I would return, just to find out that I was never supposed to. The dock was silent again, save for the occasional creak of wood, the pulse of the water. I should have left, but I knew deep down that it was already too late. The water had pulled me in long before I ever set foot on this dock again. And now, all I could do was wait for it to take me, just like it had taken my father. The wind stirred once more, and the faint whisper echoed across the water. "Come back." And as the darkness swallowed everything whole, I knew I had never left at all. The air grew colder, sharp, and biting, as if the lake itself was pulling at me, dragging me into its depths. I couldn't breathe right, my chest tightening with each passing second, each whispered call. The dock beneath my feet seemed to shift and groan, moving beneath me like it was alive. The world around me felt like it was closing in, like the very sky was pressing down, suffocating me in its weight. I stumbled backward, trying to get my bearings, but there was no sense of direction, no escape. The trees loomed in the distance, twisted and dark, The water seemed to stretch on endlessly, its surface as smooth as glass, reflecting only the emptiness of the world around me. My heart raced, but I wasn't sure if it was from fear or from the realization that this was it. This was where it all led. I looked back at the dock. The figure was gone, replaced by only the lingering memory of him. The man, or whatever it was, hadn't been my father, not truly. He had been something else, something older, something that didn't belong in this world. I could feel it now, deep in my bones, like the pull of the tide, beckoning me towards something I couldn't understand but couldn't resist. I reached out instinctively, my hand brushing against the wooden post, the rotting wood slick and damp beneath my fingers. And that's when I heard it again. The voice. "Come back." It was soft, almost a sigh in the wind. But this time, it wasn't the voice I remembered. No, this one was different. This one felt wrong, distorted, like it was being pulled from the depths of the water itself. I recoiled, stepping away from the post, my mind struggling to make sense of it. I didn't want to stay here. I didn't want to hear that voice anymore. Didn't want to feel the weight of that presence creeping up behind me. But I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the ground, the dark water calling to me, pulling me in with a force I couldn't explain. The boat was still gone, but I knew it wasn't lost. It hadn't disappeared. No, it had been waiting for me. It had always been waiting. Just like this place. Just like the dock. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see something behind me, something that had followed me from the water's edge. But there was only the empty stretch of dock and the trees beyond, their branches like twisted fingers reaching out to grab me. I tried to calm my breathing, trying to steady myself, but the air, heavy, thick, felt like it was pressing down harder with each passing second. The lake's surface rippled, just slightly, but it was enough to make my heart leap in my chest. I stepped back, moving away from the water, but the ground felt uneven, like the dock was shifting beneath me. "Come back," the voice called again, louder this time, closer. I spun around, but there was nothing there. No figure, no shadow, just the same vast, dark emptiness that had settled over the water. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but my feet were frozen to the spot. I couldn't move, couldn't think, only listen, only feel. Something was out there. Something was waiting. I knew then what I had to do, the same thing I had always done. I had to face it. I had to confront the darkness. But as I moved toward the edge of the dock, something shifted in the distance. A figure. A man. He was standing in the same place where I'd seen him before, only now he wasn't just standing, he was walking toward me. His silhouette blurred in the fading light, his outline flickering like the edges of a dream, flickering like the memories I had tried so hard to bury. I couldn't see his face. Not clearly, but I knew. I knew it was him. It was my father. And yet it wasn't. Not anymore. "Dad?" I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of the question, but the wind swallowed the sound before it could reach him. He didn't stop, didn't even acknowledge me. I stumbled backward, my mind fighting with itself. Was it really him? Was it the man I had lost? The one who had vanished that day? Or was it something else? Something that had been waiting for me to return to this place, to face the truth that had been buried in the water for so long. The man kept walking toward me, his steps slow, deliberate, his shadow stretching impossibly long behind him. I could hear the water splashing against the sides of the dock, the rhythmic sound somehow in sync with my own heartbeat. I tried to call out again, to demand answers, but my voice failed me. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth. But all I could do was stand there, watching him approach, my heart pounding, my chest tightening. He was close now. So close that I could feel the coldness of his presence, a presence that reached deep into my bones. The moment he reached the edge of the dock, everything went silent. The wind stopped, the water stopped moving, everything stopped. And then the figure raised his hand. For a brief moment, I thought he was going to speak, but there was no voice, no words, just the faintest whisper of something, like a breath, barely audible. It was then that I realized the truth. The figure wasn't my father. It was never my father. It had been something else all along, a part of this place, this dock, this water, something older, something tied to the land, to the lake, to the history that had been buried here. And now it was calling me. The figure reached out toward me, his hand moving slowly, deliberately, like it had been waiting for this moment for years. And as his hand touched mine, the world around me shattered. The dock vanished beneath my feet. The trees, the water, the boat, they all disappeared, leaving me alone in an endless black void. I could feel the cold water rising around me, pulling me down, dragging me under. But I didn't fight it. I couldn't. I had never really left. I had always been part of this place, part of the water. And now I was home. And as the darkness consumed me, I knew that the dock would always be waiting. Always. The cold water rushed around me, seeping into every pore, into every breath, until I couldn't tell where I ended and the lake began. My limbs felt heavy, as though the very weight of the lake itself had taken root inside me, pulling me deeper into its endless depths. I should have fought. I should have screamed. But there was no sound, not even the faint echo of my own voice, just the crushing silence, thick and suffocating. But the strangest part, the part that twisted my mind into knots, was that I didn't feel fear anymore. At least not the kind of fear I had expected. It wasn't the panic I had felt earlier when I realized something was terribly wrong with the dock, with the figure, with the water. No, now there was only acceptance. The air, thick with the chill of the lake, pressed in around me as I sank, the water tugging at my legs, my arms dragging me lower. The murky blackness swallowed the last vestiges of light until there was only the deep, suffocating dark. It was the same darkness I remembered from that day, the one that swallowed everything up, that left only a void, a place where you could forget who you were, where you came from. But that wasn't all. Something else lingered in the water. A pulse. A low thrum that vibrated through me, as though the lake itself had a heartbeat. At first, it was so faint, I thought I imagined it. But then it grew stronger, like the pulse of the earth itself, the rhythm of something far older than me, older than anything I had ever known. I felt my chest tighten as the pulse reverberated through my body, resonating in my bones. And then it hit me. It wasn't just the lake. It was me. I had always been part of it. The dock, the boat, the place where my father vanished, they weren't just memories, they were threads woven into the fabric of my own existence. I tried to fight the current, tried to swim, but my body felt sluggish, weighed down by an invisible force. The more I struggled, the deeper I sank, as though the water itself was pulling me closer, forcing me to face the truth. I had never really left. I had always been here, tied to this place. And in that moment, I understood something that had been buried deep within me for years. The lake, the dock, the shadow of my father, they were all part of the same story. And I was the last page, waiting to be turned. Suddenly, there was a tug, a sharp, unmistakable pull. It was as if something or someone was yanking me downward, farther into the depths. My vision blurred, and I thought I saw shapes in the dark water, shapes that were too large, too distorted to make sense of. But they were moving, circling, closing in. I didn't know if it was the water or my mind, but the darkness felt alive, breathing, watching. The pulse quickened, matching my heartbeat, until the rhythm became so intense it was like the world itself was vibrating. And then, in a sudden flash, the shapes came into focus. A figure. No, not a single figure, a dozen, maybe more, stretching out of the water, reaching up toward me with long, skeletal hands. Faces that I almost recognized, eyes wide with unspoken fear. Faces that were familiar but not my father's. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The hands reached for me, pulling at my limbs, grasping at my clothes, at my skin. The water around me grew colder, colder still, until it felt like it was freezing my blood in place. But then, just as suddenly, they let go. I was falling. The weight of the world, the weight of everything I had ever known, fell away. The pressure, the tugging force of the lake released me, letting me drift in the space between life and death, between the known and the unknown. For a moment, there was nothing but emptiness. And then the surface broke. I gasped for air as the water surged around me, crashing over my head, throwing me back. I kicked, flailed, fighting the weight of the water that felt heavier now than it ever had before. The air tasted sharp, as if I hadn't inhaled it in years. My body felt like it was moving on its own, pushing forward, swimming through the water, but I couldn't see the shore. The dock was gone. The boat was gone. Everything was gone, but the pulse was still there. I could feel it. It was the heartbeat of the lake, and now it was inside me. It was inside all of us. I reached out, my hands scraping against something solid, something wooden. I grabbed it, pulling myself up, gasping for breath, and through the fog of exhaustion and water in my lungs, I saw it. The dock, reappearing through the darkness, its weathered wood stretching out like an old familiar hand, waiting for me to return. I didn't want to. I knew deep down that I shouldn't, but something inside of me knew I had no choice. I had to return. The dock creaked under my weight as I pulled myself up and I turned to face the water. The lake was still, undisturbed, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better now. I knew that the water didn't forget. It never forgot. And as I stood there shivering in the dark, staring into the vast expanse of the lake, I felt it again. The pulse, the rhythm, the pull. The lake had claimed me, and now I was a part of it. Just like my father had been, just like everyone who had come before. I wasn't just standing on the dock anymore. I was part of it, part of the place that had taken so much from me, part of the story that was never meant to end. And I knew with a certainty that made my skin crawl that it would never let me go. The lake had waited for me, just like it had waited for him. And now I was bound to it, forever. And that's when I heard it once more, the voice rising from the water, a whisper carried on the wind. Come back. And this time I knew the truth. I had never truly left, and I never would. I tried to breathe, but the air was thick, like it was soaked with the same water that had nearly swallowed me whole. The steady pulse of the lake hummed in my chest, reverberating in my bones, anchoring me to the spot, keeping me tethered in place. The wind had died down, but the oppressive silence lingered, pressing against my ears, making everything seem too loud. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Not really. The dock beneath me felt like it was alive, groaning softly with every shift in the air. The wood seemed to pulse with a rhythm that matched the beat of my heart. But it wasn't just the dock. It was everything. The trees, the water, the air, they were all part of the same thing, the same entity, the same darkness. I turned slowly, half expecting to see the figure again, the one that had pulled me into the water, that had called me back to this cursed place. But there was nothing. No man standing at the end of the dock, no silhouette in the mist, just the empty stretch of rotting wood leading out to the dark lake. But I knew he was there. I could feel it. I could feel him watching, waiting. The voice was gone now, but the weight of it hung in the air, like a heavy fog that refused to lift. I could still hear it echoing in my mind. Come back. It wasn't just a command. It was an invitation. It was a pull. Something deeper than the water. Deeper than the lake itself. I staggered back toward the center of the dock, feeling the cold wood beneath my feet, the way it shifted with my movements. I could almost hear the whispers again, curling in the edges of my mind. I couldn't understand them, but I could feel them. I could feel the presence of the others, those who had come before, those who had disappeared, lost to this place. Their voices were silent now, but their touch lingered. The pulse quickened, pounding in my ears, and I felt a strange compulsion, a need to reach the water again. Something had changed in me. Something deep inside had shifted, like a switch had been flipped, and now I couldn't look away from the water. I had to know. I had to understand what it wanted from me. I stepped forward, closer to the edge, my feet moving before I could think. The air grew colder again, and the water seemed to reach up, like it was alive, like it was calling me, beckoning me back. Just one step. The thought came to me, like a whisper I didn't want to hear. Just one step, and you'll understand. I could almost hear the figures in the water, their fingers stretching toward me, their hands reaching for my skin. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the rough wood of the dock. It was then that I felt it, a shift in the water, a disturbance, a ripple, small at first but then growing. Something was moving beneath the surface, something big. The water churned, and for a moment, I thought I saw a shadow beneath the surface, a shape, moving quickly, too fast for me to comprehend. I pulled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared. But the pull was stronger now. It had always been stronger than I realized, and now I couldn't escape it. I turned away from the edge, panic rising in my throat, but the ground beneath me felt wrong. The dock was shifting beneath my feet. I wasn't standing on solid ground anymore. No, it was sinking. Sinking into the depths. Come back. The voice whispered again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just calling me back to the dock. It was calling me back to something else. Something deeper. I looked behind me. The dark water stretched out endlessly, and in the distance I thought I saw something. Something rising out of the lake. A figure. Tall. Dark. Its outline was indistinct, shrouded in mist, but I knew who it was. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. It was my father, or at least it had been. But now it wasn't just him. It was something else, something worse, something older. I felt my knees weaken, my heart raced. The pulse was inescapable now, thumping louder, pounding harder. The darkness around me grew thicker, pressing against me like it wanted to suffocate me. I wanted to run, I wanted to scream, I wanted to fight, but my body refused to move. I was frozen in place, trapped between the dock and the water. And then the figure stepped forward. I saw it clearly now. Too clearly. The figure didn't have a face, not one I could recognize, but it had my father's body, his clothes, his posture, his presence. But it wasn't him. It was a thing that had taken him, a thing that had been waiting for me. I took a step back, but the dock creaked beneath me. The wood splintered, groaning under the weight of something ancient. The dock was giving way. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, the sensation that the ground beneath me was unraveling, that the very fabric of this place was tearing apart. "It's time," the voice said. And I knew. I knew it was time to face the truth. I wasn't meant to be here. None of us were. But it didn't matter now. The lake had taken me, just as it had taken my father, and there would be no escaping it. The darkness rose, swallowing the light. I closed my eyes, feeling the water rise around me, pulling me under again. But this time I wasn't fighting it. This time I knew there was no going back. I had always been part of the lake, part of the dark, waiting for someone to return, just as my father had once been, just as it had always been. And now I would never leave. The lake had claimed me. And this time it would never let me go. The water engulfed me, and the cold was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't the bite of winter's chill or the frigid embrace of a deep lake. No, this was something else. Something that sank deeper than the surface, into the very marrow of my bones. The lake had opened its mouth wide and swallowed me whole. And as I sank beneath the dark water, I realized that I wasn't just fighting to breathe anymore. I was fighting to hold on to myself, to hold on to whatever part of me was still human. I didn't know how long I'd been submerged. Minutes? Hours? Time had no meaning now. It was just darkness and the cold and the distant pulse, the heartbeat of the lake, steady and relentless, like it had been here long before me, and it would remain long after I was gone. But then something shifted. The pressure around me, on my chest, my limbs, began to ease. Slowly at first, as if the lake was recognizing that I wasn't a threat, that I had surrendered, that I had finally given in. The pulse grew louder in my ears, filling my head with its rhythm. It was calming, almost soothing, and I felt myself drifting, floating, but I wasn't free. In the distance, I thought I saw something, a light, a flicker, far below me. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it beckoned. It pulled at me, drawing me closer. I reached out instinctively, stretching my arms, my fingers desperate to touch it, to understand what it was. As I neared it, I could feel it, a presence, something watching, waiting. The water seemed to part around me, opening up like it was guiding me to the source. The light grew stronger, and now I could make out shapes moving in the water, shadows that didn't belong, shapes that seemed to flicker like flames caught in the current. The lake was full of them. Figures, shadows, faces that looked like memories I couldn't quite grasp. Some were distorted, others blurred, and all of them were staring at me. Silent. Waiting. I recoiled, but the water held me, pressing me forward, urging me deeper. I had no control. I couldn't fight it. I was powerless against the pull, and then in the silence a voice familiar, distorted, whispered through the water. Come closer. It wasn't my father's voice anymore. It wasn't even human. But I understood it. It was the lake. It was the thing beneath the water, the one that had been here long before me, the one that had waited for me to return. I couldn't stop myself. My body moved toward the light, toward the figures, drawn in by the same thing that had once drawn my father, the same thing that had drawn every soul before me, every soul that had disappeared into the water, only to be forgotten by the world above. And then I saw it. In the center of the light, a figure emerged from the depths. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its form seemed to ripple and shift, like it wasn't fully real, but somehow more real than anything I had ever known. Its body was a mass of shadows, its outline blurred, its movements jerky and unnatural. But it was no mistake. It was the thing that had waited for me. It reached out with long skeletal arms, its hands thin and elongated like the twisted roots of a tree that had lived too long. It had no face, no eyes, just a vast, empty space where something should have been. But as it neared me, I felt it, a deep, aching pull, as though the very air around it was soaked with hunger, a hunger that could never be satisfied, a thirst that could never be quenched. Come back, it whispered, the voice crackling through the water, reverberating in my mind. I could feel it in my chest, in my gut, a knot of dread and acceptance coiling together. It wasn't just asking me to come back. It was demanding it. This was it. This was what had always been waiting, not just the dock, not just the lake, but the thing beneath it all, the thing that had claimed my father, that had claimed every soul that had ever disappeared here. And now it was my turn. I could feel myself sinking again, slowly, pulled deeper into the water, pulled toward the thing that had waited for me, that had always known I would return. But as I descended, I felt something shift inside me. Something fractured. I wasn't ready. I didn't want this. I didn't want to become one of them. I didn't want to be swallowed by the lake, to be forgotten in the darkness. I had to fight. I kicked. I struggled. I fought with everything I had, pushing away from the thing, away from the pull that had claimed me. My limbs were heavy, my movements sluggish, but I fought, desperate, clawing at the water, trying to break free. And for the first time, the pulse began to fade. The pressure that had once been suffocating now eased, just slightly, enough for me to fight back. The shadows around me retreated, the voices quieting. I kicked harder, swam with every ounce of strength I had left. My lungs burned, my chest ached with each desperate gasp for air, but I kept pushing. The light from above was growing, and I swam toward it, ignoring the cold, ignoring the weight, ignoring the voices that still whispered through the water. I don't know how long I swam. It felt like an eternity. But eventually, I broke through. The surface. I gasped for air, choking on it, pulling it into my lungs like it was the first breath I had ever taken. The water surged around me, but I managed to keep my head above it. The dock was there, just a few feet away, and I pulled myself toward it with everything I had left. My hands scraped against the wet wood, and I clawed my way up, desperate for solid ground, desperate for escape. I collapsed onto the dock, coughing, gasping for air, my heart pounding. My body was shaking, my muscles screaming in protest, but I didn't care. I was alive. But as I lay there, the lake still whispering in the back of my mind, I knew something had changed. Something deep inside of me had shifted. The pulse, the pull, the hunger, it was still there, lingering in my chest, in my mind. The lake had tried to claim me, just like it had my father, and maybe, in some way, it had. I don't know if I'll ever be free of it. I don't know if anyone truly escapes this place, but for now I've managed to break free, and as I lie here, Gasping for breath, I can hear it, just faintly in the distance, the whisper. Come back. And I know deep down that it will never stop. The lake will never stop calling. And one day when it's ready, I'll return, because the lake never lets you go. It never lets you go. I should have run. I should have driven far away as fast as I could, left this place behind like a bad dream, a nightmare I could wake up from. But I didn't. I stayed there, kneeling on the dock, my body trembling from exhaustion, my heart still thudding in my chest like I had just run a marathon. My breath came in ragged gasps, each one a reminder that I had made it, that I had escaped. Or so I thought. The water stretched before me, calm now, almost peaceful. The lake had returned to its stillness, but I knew better. The silence felt like a lie. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't calm. It was waiting. I dragged myself to my feet, my legs unsteady, my body aching from the strain of the struggle. I looked at the boat, empty, lifeless, the ropes dangling loosely from the posts, just as they had before. The boat that had once carried me and my father, now nothing more than a hollow vessel. I could still see the reflection of the water rippling in the fading light like a memory that wouldn't let go. I took a step back, then another, my feet moving instinctively as though I was already moving away, already trying to escape. But my mind kept going back to that voice, the voice from the water, the voice that called me back. Come back. It wasn't a command anymore. It wasn't an invitation. It was a promise that no matter how far I ran, no matter how fast I tried to escape, the lake would always be there, always waiting, always calling. And I realized then that I had never really left. I had escaped the water, yes. I had made it back to the shore. But the lake, the thing beneath it, the pulse in the water, they had marked me. They had claimed me. I was no different than the others now, the ones whose faces I had seen in the depths, the ones who had vanished into the lake, who become part of it, part of its hunger, its dark pull, and I too would never truly escape. The wind picked up again, colder now, sharper. It stung my face, biting into my skin. But I didn't flinch, I didn't look away, because I knew that the lake was waiting. It was always waiting. I could hear the whisper again, faint at first but growing stronger. Come back. The voice wasn't in my ears. It wasn't a sound. It was inside me. It was in my mind, in my heart, in my blood. I could feel it as if it was part of me. And I knew, deep down, that I could never outrun it. Not really. I turned away from the dock, from the water, and started walking. My steps were slow, my body heavy, but I kept moving. I didn't know where I was going. It didn't matter. I had to leave this place. I had to get as far away as I could. But with every step I took, I could feel the pull. It wasn't just the lake anymore. It was the land, the trees, the very earth beneath my feet. It was all part of it. The pulse, the call, the thing that had taken my father, the thing that had waited for me. I tried to shut it out, tried to push it away, but it was inside me, under my skin, coursing through my veins. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't outrun it. I walked faster now, my breath quickening, my heart pounding again. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to stop it, but I couldn't. It was too late for that. The path ahead of me was just a blur of shadows, the trees closing in, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the water behind me. It wasn't far now. The dock was still there, still waiting, but I couldn't bring myself to turn back. I couldn't. And then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of something moving behind me, a rustling, a footstep, the sound of something following. I spun around, panic flooding my chest, but there was nothing. The woods were empty, the path silent, but I wasn't alone. I felt it. The presence, the weight of something just beyond my reach. Watching, waiting. I took another step and then another. My legs were growing tired, my mind foggy, but I kept moving. But then I saw it, the light. It flickered in the distance, a dull glow that cut through the darkness of the woods. It was soft, faint, but unmistakable. The same light I had seen in the water, the one that had drawn me closer, that had pulled me back. It was impossible. I had just left the lake. I had just walked away. I should have been free, but the light, It wasn't real. It wasn't from the world above. It was the lake calling me back. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath caught in my throat. The whisper echoed again, louder now, as if it was right next to me. Come back. And I knew I couldn't escape it. Not anymore. The lake had me, it had claimed me, and now it would never let me go. The darkness around me thickened, pressing in from all sides. The trees seemed to close in like the woods swallowing me whole. The light flickered again, and in that instant I understood. The lake wasn't just a place, it was a force, a pull, a hunger. And I was its prey. I turned and walked back toward it, toward the light, toward the water. And I knew that this time I wasn't escaping. This time there was no going back. The wood seemed to fall silent as I approached the light, my every step heavy with the inevitability of what I had become. The air around me felt thicker now, the darkness deeper, as if the world itself had folded in on me, trapping me in this moment where there was no past, no future, just this place, and the endless suffocating pull of the lake. The light flickered again, casting eerie shadows that danced on the trees, but it wasn't comforting. It wasn't warm. It was cold, distant, a reflection of something ancient and restless. And as I moved closer, I felt it, a deep, vibrating hum, like the lake itself was alive, breathing beneath the earth. It was calling me, not just with the voice in my mind, but with the very ground beneath my feet. I stumbled forward, unable to stop, my mind spinning in a haze. The path was blurring before me, the trees warping, bending in impossible ways, as if the world around me was shifting, becoming something else. The distance between me and the light seemed to stretch and collapse at once, pulling forward even as my legs begged me to stop. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't turn away. I felt the familiar weight of the water again, the way it had held me, dragged me down. The echo of its pulse reverberated through my chest, faster now, like it was inside me, like it had always been inside me, wrapped around my heart, pulling me toward it. I broke through the trees and found myself standing on the edge of the dock again. The boat was there, waiting, just as it had been. The ropes hung loosely from the posts, the same twisted knots, the same weathered wood. The air was thick with the smell of salt water, and the sound of the lake's gentle lapping against the shore filled my ears, like a lullaby sung to those who had already surrendered. And there, at the end of the dock, was the figure. I didn't need to see his face to know who he was. I could feel him in my bones, the same presence that had haunted me from the moment I returned. My father, or what had been my father. He stood there, motionless, his form impossibly tall, his shadow stretching out across the water, his outline blurred and flickered, as though the very air around him couldn't decide if he was real. His hands, long and thin, hung by his sides like he was waiting for me to come back. I could feel the pull, stronger than ever, clawing at my chest. It wasn't just the lake anymore. It wasn't just the dock. It was everything, the trees, the earth, the sky. It was all part of it now. It had all been waiting for me to return. Come back, he said, his voice a low, rumbling whisper that curled around my mind like smoke. I tried to move, to step away, but my body wouldn't listen. My feet were planted in place, my legs frozen, as if the ground itself had claimed me. I looked at the boat again. It was waiting for me, the same way it had waited for my father. The ropes swayed gently in the breeze, but there was no sound, no life. Only the lake, only the pull. I could feel the presence of the others now, the ones who had been here before, the ones who had disappeared into the water, who had become part of the lake, part of its endless hunger. Their voices were silent, but I could hear them. I could feel them watching. I was one of them now. I had always been one of them. The lake had never let me go. It had never let my father go. It had just been waiting for the right moment. And now it had me. I felt the tears well up, but they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of acceptance. This was it. This was my fate. The lake had claimed me, just as it had claimed my father, just as it had claimed all those who had come before. I stepped toward the boat, my legs moving on their own, as if they knew the way, as if they had always known. The rope creaked softly as I took hold of it, and for a moment I hesitated. A part of me, a small, distant part, wanted to run, wanted to scream, but it was too late for that. I stepped into the boat, and as soon as I did, the water surged beneath me, the boat rocking gently as if the lake itself had welcomed me home. The light faded, swallowed by the darkness of the lake, but the pulse never stopped. It was inside me now, as much a part of me as the blood in my veins. And as I sat in the boat, the water lapping gently at the sides, I felt something shift, something deep inside. The lake had me. The lake had always had me. The whisper came again, soft but clear, "Come back." I had never really left, not truly. I had been part of it all along. And now there was nothing left to fight. As the boat drifted deeper into the blackness, I knew this would be my life now. The lake, the dark, the pull. I was one of them. Forever. The lake had claimed me, and it would never let me go. The boat drifted silently, its movements gentle but steady, like the slow pulse of the lake itself, guiding me forward. The darkness pressed in all around, wrapping around me like a shroud, and the only sound was the rhythmic splash of the water against the hull. The moon had disappeared behind thick clouds, leaving the world utterly shrouded in blackness. But I didn't need the light. I knew where I was going. I always had. The whisper grew louder in my mind, an undeniable call, a voice that had always been with me, even before I ever set foot on the dock. "Come back," it said again, but this time there was no fear, no dread, only a strange sense of peace. The kind of peace that comes from finally accepting what was always inevitable. I stared out into the water, the darkness beyond the boat almost swallowing it whole, and yet there was something there, something moving beneath the surface. I could feel it before I saw it. The way the water trembled, as if the lake was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, or someone. I wasn't alone in the boat. Not really. I could feel the presence beside me, just out of sight. I didn't need to look to know who it was, my father, or what had once been him. The same presence that had waited for me, that had been calling me back since the moment I returned. The boat rocked slightly as though it too acknowledged his presence. A part of me, the last remaining shard of resistance, wanted to scream, to ask why, to demand answers. But I couldn't. I already knew. The lake had a way of swallowing everything. The past, the future, even the very nature of time itself. And now I was part of it. No longer a visitor, no longer an outsider. I was one with the water, one with the pull that had always been here. The boat drifted deeper, farther from the shore, from the world I had known. The darkness seemed endless, stretching out in every direction. And yet I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't need to be. This was where I belonged. This was where I had always belonged. The lake had waited for me, and now I would become part of it. My father had, and so had the others. And now, it was my turn. I felt the tug at the edges of my consciousness, the lake pulling at my mind, reminding me of its power, of its eternal hunger. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I felt it again, the pulse. The heartbeat of the lake, deep and resonant. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling, a vibration in my chest, in my soul. I opened my eyes and saw it. Far ahead, through the darkness, a faint glow began to emerge. It wasn't the moon, not the light of the stars, but something else, something ancient. The same glow I had seen in the water, the same flicker of light that had drawn me here. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the lake, as the heartbeat that had become part of me. The boat seemed to pick up speed as it moved toward the light. There was no turning back now. I could feel the pull in my chest, as if my very being was being drawn toward it. My father's presence beside me grew stronger, and I could almost hear his voice, though it was no longer words. Just the hum of something ancient, something older than memory itself. The glow grew brighter, and I could make out shapes in the distance. Figures, moving in the water. Faces, watching, waiting. Their eyes were empty, but I could feel them. They were the ones who had come before, the ones who had disappeared into the lake, swallowed whole by its darkness. They were waiting for me, and I too would join them. The boat drifted closer to the light, and I saw it then. A figure, standing in the water, illuminated by the strange glow. Tall, impossibly tall, its form blurry, indistinct, shifting like a mirage. It was not human, not entirely. But I knew it. I had always known it. The figure turned toward me, and in its presence I felt a shift, a deep understanding, a connection. This was the source, the heart of the lake, the thing that had been waiting for me, for my father, for all of us, the thing that had claimed the souls of so many before me. It was time. The boat glided to a stop just before the figure, and I didn't need to step out. I knew what would happen. I knew what I had to do. The figure reached out, its long, skeletal hand extending toward me, and as it touched my arm, I felt the cold, the deep, unyielding chill of the water, of the lake itself, rushing through me. It wasn't a drowning sensation, not exactly. It was something deeper, a sinking, a falling into something vast and eternal. The lake wrapped around me, pulling me into its depths, and as I descended, I felt myself becoming one with it. My limbs, my thoughts, my very essence, all blending into the darkness, into the water, into the pulse. And then there was nothing. No more boat, no more figure, no more darkness, just the lake. I was home. I didn't know how much time had passed. It could have been seconds. It could have been years. The lake no longer held any sense of time. It didn't matter. All that mattered was the stillness, the quiet. But in the stillness, I heard it again, the whisper, the one I had heard from the very beginning, the one that had never stopped calling me, "Come back." And I knew, as I floated in the endless black, that it would never stop. The lake would never stop calling. I was part of it now, and it would never let me go. The darkness was all-encompassing, wrapping around me like a heavy cloak, suffocating and cold. But I wasn't afraid anymore. There was no fear left, only an unsettling peace, like the calmness you feel when you realize you've been part of something all along, something much bigger than yourself. The lake had consumed me, yes, but in doing so it had also accepted me, and now I was part of it. I was one with it. But the silence, despite its apparent tranquility, was still too heavy. There was something else underneath it, a low hum, a constant vibration that seemed to pulse through the very core of my being. It was a call, subtle and unrelenting. I could feel it in my chest, in my soul, as if it were beckoning me to understand something deeper, something that had been hidden from me all along. I tried to focus, to grasp it, but there was nothing to hold on to. No solid ground, no sky, just the endless expanse of water. No beginning, no end. Only the vast, ever-expanding emptiness. But then, from within the dark, something shifted. The pulse grew stronger. The water around me started to move, swirling in patterns that I couldn't comprehend. It was as though the lake was alive, not just with the pull, but with intention. It had purpose. It had always had purpose. I was beginning to realize that the lake wasn't just an entity. It was a force, a living, breathing thing that had been here long before me, long before my father, long before anyone had ever set foot near its shores. The hum in my chest became a beat, rhythmic, like a heart that had been beating long before my birth. And as the darkness around me shifted, something materialized. Slowly at first, then more quickly. Faces, not just the faces of those who had come before, but others, my own, my father's. Figures that seemed both familiar and distant, like fragments of memories I couldn't quite place. Their eyes were empty, but their presence was undeniable. They were still here, still part of the lake, part of the eternal hunger that had claimed them, just as it had claimed me. I reached out, my fingers grazing the water, and I felt something new, a presence, something even older, something deeper than the lake itself. The water rippled, and I saw a figure. No, more than a figure, a shape, an outline, something vast and endless, stretching beyond my vision. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could name. It was the lake, the heart of it, the source. It was the thing that had been waiting, the thing that had drawn me in, the thing that had claimed my father. And as I stared into its depths, I understood. It wasn't just the lake that had been waiting for me. It was the force behind it, the entity, the hunger that had existed long before time itself. I wasn't just part of the lake now. I was part of it. The pull, the whisper, the call. It had been for me all along. It had been waiting for me to understand that I wasn't a visitor. I wasn't an outsider. I had always belonged to the lake. My father had belonged to it. All the others who had disappeared had belonged to it. And now I belonged to it too. I felt the presence of the thing, no, the force press against me. It wasn't physical. It was mental, spiritual, something deeper than the water, deeper than the body. It was as if the lake had reached inside me, torn away the last remnants of who I had been, and replaced it with something new, something that could never leave. The faces of those who had come before flickered in the water, and I saw them for what they were. Not just memories, not just ghosts. They were fragments of the lake itself, pieces of its hunger, of its eternal pull. And I understood. The lake didn't just claim you, it made you. It transformed you into part of its endless cycle. You didn't leave, you didn't escape. You became part of the water, part of the pull, part of the hunger that had always been there. The ones who disappeared weren't lost. They had simply returned, just like me. I felt a shift within me, a change in the very fabric of my being. The lake had accepted me. It had always known I would come back, and now I was part of it, part of the water, part of the eternal hunger. But the strange part, the part that twisted something deep within me, was the realization that I didn't feel lost anymore. I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt complete. The pulse of the lake surrounded me, filling me. The faces of the lost ones of my father, of the others, all merged with mine. We were all the same. We were all part of it. I was no longer a person. I was part of the lake, part of the darkness, part of the pulse. And as I drifted deeper, the water seemed to stretch out before me, endless, welcoming. The faces flickered in and out of sight, their forms melting into the water, becoming one with it. I closed my eyes. The darkness enveloped me, wrapping me in its embrace, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt at peace. The call wasn't an invitation anymore. It wasn't a command. It was a promise. A promise that I was no longer alone. A promise that I would never leave. The lake had me. It always had. And now it always would. And I too would wait. Just as my father had waited. Just as all the others had waited. For the next one to come. The cycle was eternal. The hunger was endless. And in that moment, I knew, without a doubt, that the lake would never stop calling. It would never let me go, and I would never leave. The water had become a part of me now, an extension of my thoughts, my breath, my very existence. Each movement of the current felt like a heartbeat in my chest, and the lake's pull was no longer something I could resist. I had become one with it, the very essence of the lake, of the thing that had always existed beneath the surface. The faces of those who had come before me flickered in and out of my mind, their forms fading and reappearing like the gentle ripples on the water. They weren't lost anymore. They weren't ghosts. They had found their place here in the dark, in the depths where the hunger never stopped, where the pull was endless. And now I was part of that endless cycle. The lake's hum filled my ears, vibrating in my bones, sinking into my soul. The whisper of "come back" was no longer a call. It was a truth, a promise, a certainty. I could feel the lake shift beneath me, as if acknowledging my acceptance, as if I had finally understood. This was where I belonged. This was where I had always belonged. The darkness around me seemed to stretch on forever, an eternal sea. But now, instead of feeling alone or lost, I felt anchored. There was no longer any fear, only a strange kind of peace, a quiet acceptance that I was part of something much larger than myself. And as the water swirled around me, as the last remnants of my former self melted away into the darkness, I understood what had happened to my father, what had happened to all those others. They had been here before me, part of this same cycle, this same hunger. I wasn't just a visitor to the lake. I was an extension of it. I had always been. And now my father, my soul, everything I had been absorbed into the lake, just as I was. We were all one with the water, one with the pull that never ceased. The lake had no end, no beginning. It simply was. And I too would simply be. The hunger would never stop, the call would never end, And as I sank deeper into the embrace of the water, I felt it. The promise of eternity, of endless waiting. I had returned. I had always returned, and I always would. The cycle was eternal. The lake would never let go, and I would never leave. I don't know what it means when the dogs go silent, but I know it's never good. We were in northern Arkansas, late October, drifting between campgrounds on our way to see the fall colors in the Ozarks. I had been on the road with my wife Emily for 3 weeks, towing our 22-foot fifth wheel behind the truck. Nights were getting colder now, mornings coming with frost on the picnic tables, the air smelling faintly of wood smoke from other campers' fires. We'd been chasing quiet spots, the kind of campgrounds where you can hear coyotes in the distance and owls calling over the tree line. But that night, the quiet wasn't the right kind. We'd pulled into a half-forgotten campground tucked deep in a hollow. A real hollow, not just a dip in the land, but a place where the ridges crowd close and the shadows seem to last longer than the daylight. It was called Benton Creek Camp, though the camp part was optimistic. From the looks of it, nobody had kept up the place in years. The gate was open, the check-in booth empty. A faded sign with peeling green paint leaned sideways in the weeds, and the gravel road wound down between thick stands of oak and hickory, disappearing into shadow. Emily had given me that look, the one that says, "This feels off," but she didn't say anything. I was the one who'd been pushing for more secluded campgrounds. The last few spots had been packed with weekend warriors blasting music, their generators running all night. I told her this one would be better. Quieter. We found a site near the creek. The fire ring was choked with weeds and the picnic table had one leg buried deep into the dirt. Still, the spot was flat, and the trees on all sides meant we'd have some privacy. I backed in, we leveled the rig, and by the time the stabilizers were down, the sun had dropped behind the ridge. That's when I noticed the first thing. There were dogs in the hollow. I'd seen 2 of them earlier. Skinny hounds trotting along the edge of the gravel road when we came in. I figured they belonged to some local who let them roam. But now, in the half-dark, I realized the sound of them had stopped. No barking, no yips, no pads crunching in the leaves, just stillness. It wasn't total silence. The creek made a low, restless noise in the background, and the last of the crickets were still at it, but it felt as if the air had gone heavier, muffled. Emily was inside making chili, the smell of onions and tomatoes drifting out the open window. I stood by the fire ring, stacking kindling, but my ears kept searching the darkness for something to break that hush. When it came, it wasn't a dog. It was a sound I can only describe as unsettled breathing. Not close, not far, just somewhere out there in the trees across the creek. A slow inhale, held too long, then a shaky exhale. It came once, then again, and then was gone, swallowed by the dark. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a deer snuffling at the creek bank. But I'd hunted enough in my younger years to know what deer sound like when they breathe, and this wasn't it. Emily stepped out with 2 steaming bowls. "You're jumpy," she said, noticing the way I kept glancing toward the creek. "Just getting used to the quiet," I told her. We ate by lantern light, our folding chairs pulled up close. The hollow stayed dim even when the moon rose, the ridge walls blotting out most of the sky. Somewhere higher up, a barred owl called, the sound sharp and lonely. By the time we cleaned up and doused the lantern, the fire had burned low. I told Emily I'd take a quick walk up the gravel road just to stretch my legs before bed. She didn't like the idea. I could see it in her face, but she only said, "Don't go far." I didn't. I walked maybe 100 yards up, just far enough to get a better look at the upper end of the hollow. The road curved out of sight, the trees leaning over it like they were conspiring. That was when I heard the breathing again. This time, it was closer. It wasn't steady. A few quick inhales, a pause, then one long, deliberate breath that almost whistled through teeth. It came from the tree line to my right, just inside the edge of the dark. I stopped walking. The air felt thick in my lungs, and I realized my own breathing was louder than I wanted it to be. I thought about calling out, something like, "Hey there," in case it was a person. But something deep in my chest told me not to. Not because I thought they'd be dangerous, exactly, but because I had the awful feeling that whoever or whatever it was didn't want to be noticed. When the breathing stopped, I turned and walked back toward the camper without looking behind me. Emily was already inside with the blinds drawn. I locked the door, telling myself it was just out of habit, but my hands shook more than I wanted to admit. That night, I dreamed of our old dog, Tanner, a black lab we'd had years ago. In the dream, he was lying at the foot of the bed, ears pricked toward the door, his lips curled in a soundless growl. I woke up with my heart pounding and the echo of that growl in my head. The air inside the camper felt cold. I slid out of bed, careful not to wake Emily, and peered through the blinds. The hollow was all shadow and silver moonlight on the creek. Nothing moved. But in the distance, on the ridge above us, I saw a pale shape. Not bright enough to be a flashlight, too steady to be moonlight through branches. It stayed in one place, just past the tree line, and I couldn't tell if it was watching us or turned away. I didn't wake Emily. I just stood there until my eyes burned from not blinking, and when I finally looked again, it was gone. The dogs never barked. Not once. The morning came late in the hollow. The light didn't spill in so much as seep through, thin and gray, like it had been filtered through layers of ash. The air outside was colder than it should have been for late October, the kind of cold that sits on your skin instead of sinking in. Emily was already up, making coffee. I stepped outside with my mug, scanning the ridge. No pale shape now, just oak and hickory stretching up into the clouded sky. Something had moved in the night, though. The weeds in the fire ring were flattened, bent in a spiral, like someone had pressed a hand into them and turned. There were no footprints, but the damp leaves nearby were disturbed in a way that made my stomach knot. I told myself it was just a raccoon. A big one, maybe. We took a walk after breakfast, following the creek upstream. The water was shallow, the stones slick with algae, the banks lined with roots that looked like frozen snakes. The further we went, the quieter it got. No birds, no insects, not even the faint sound of wind in the branches, and this time I noticed the trees weren't moving at all, though the clouds above them scudded by quick. Emily stopped, her hand light on my arm. "Do you hear that?" she asked. I listened. The creek gurgled softly, but beneath it was something else, a faint, hollow thumping, like someone knocking on wood from far away. 3 slow knocks. Pause. 3 more. It wasn't coming from any one direction. It seemed to seep out from the hollow itself, like the sound was trapped in the bowl of the valley, bouncing from ridge to ridge until it lost its edges. I wanted to say it was just a woodpecker. But woodpeckers don't keep such deliberate rhythm. We turned back after that. I didn't say it, but I felt better with the camper in sight again. Around midday, an old truck came rumbling down the gravel road, an F-150 from the early 90s, its paint the color of rust. The driver slowed when he saw us outside. He was a wiry man with a leathered face, maybe in his 70s, wearing a ball cap that looked older than the truck. "You folks camping here?" he asked through the open window. I nodded. "Yeah, we thought we'd stay a night or 2. He shook his head slightly. "Not many do." Emily glanced at me, then back at him. "Why's that?" The old man's eyes went to the ridge, then back to us. "Dogs don't like it here," he said simply. "They'll come close, then turn tail. Some say it's the smell, others say it's the quiet." He didn't elaborate, just tipped his cap and rolled on down the road, the sound of his engine fading fast in the dense air. That night, the cold set in harder. Our breath fogged inside the camper, and the little space heater ran non-stop. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound. Not the breathing this time, but something dragging through the leaves just outside. It was slow, uneven. Drag. Pause. Drag. I eased out of bed, careful not to wake Emily, and peered through the blinds. At first, I didn't see anything. Then my eyes caught it. Something pale, almost gray, just at the edge of the site near the tree line. Not quite a person's shape, not quite an animal's. It moved without lifting whatever part of itself made contact with the ground, like it had weight it couldn't fully carry. I must have made a sound because Emily stirred behind me. "What is it?" she whispered. "Stay in bed," I said. The pale shape stopped moving. It didn't turn toward me, but I felt somehow that it knew I was watching. My chest went tight. Then, just as suddenly, it slid backward into the dark between the trees. Not turning, not walking away, but receding like something being pulled on a rope. The silence after was complete. Even the creek sounded like it was holding its breath. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the ground where I'd seen it was undisturbed. No drag marks, no footprints, just damp leaves. Emily wanted to leave. I told her we'd give it one more night. I don't know why I said that. Maybe I thought leaving so soon would feel like we'd let the place get the better of us. Maybe I was just stubborn. But a part of me, a part I didn't admit out loud, wanted to understand what was happening here, because the dogs wouldn't howl, and I needed to know why. The afternoon drifted by in that strange, stagnant way where time seems to lose its edges. Emily busied herself inside, reorganizing cabinets that didn't need reorganizing. I wandered the perimeter of our site, scanning the ridges. Every so often, I'd catch the faint smell of something sharp and metallic, like wet iron, but it would vanish before I could trace its source. Around 4 o'clock, the clouds split just enough for a slant of sunlight to reach the hollow floor. You'd think it would have made the place feel warmer, but it didn't. It only seemed to light up the dampness, making the moss glow a sickly green and the creek flash dull silver. That was when I noticed the sound again. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. Only this time, the rhythm was different. Not faster, but heavier, as though whatever made it was closer. It didn't echo in the same way. It felt direct, unfiltered by the ridges. I tried to pinpoint it, turning in slow circles. The knocks seemed to shift with me, always just outside the edge of where I was looking. "Do you hear it?" Emily asked from the doorway. Her voice was too steady. She'd heard it for a while, I realized, and had been waiting to see if I would notice. I started walking toward the creek, following the sound. The air cooled with each step, for it to see him, and the faint smell of iron grew sharper. My boots slid a little on the wet stones as I crossed to the opposite bank. The knocks stopped, but in their place came the breathing. Slow, deliberate, not trying to hide this time. The hairs on my arms rose, and I felt my own breath shorten in response. It was coming from deeper in the trees, a space where the undergrowth gave way to bare earth, like something had been moving through there for a long time. I took one step forward. "Don't," Emily said from behind me, her voice smaller now. I looked back at her. She wasn't standing in the doorway anymore. She was halfway down the bank, arms folded tight across her chest, her eyes locked on the dark space between the trees. Then I heard another sound, a wet, almost sloshing shuffle, followed by something that could have been a whisper or just the creek gurgling oddly. It was enough to pull me back. We crossed the creek without speaking, and I busied myself with small, pointless tasks until the sun slipped behind the ridge again. That night, we shut every blind, locked the door, and let the heater run full blast. Emily read in bed. I sat at the small dinette, staring at the empty black square of the window. It wasn't until after midnight that the knocks came again, so close this time that I felt them through the floor. 3 heavy thuds, a pause, then 3 more. Emily sat up in bed. "It's on the steps," she whispered. I didn't want to look, but I did. The pale shape was there again, only now it had definition. Too tall to be a person, too narrow to be a bear. Its head, if that's what it was, tilted slowly, as though studying the window. And then, almost imperceptibly, the blinds shifted inward, like something had pressed its face against them from outside. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter and snapped it on. The beam hit empty air. The knocks stopped. Emily wouldn't lie down again after that. We sat together until dawn, drinking bitter coffee, the silence outside pressing on us like a weight. In the morning, the steps were damp but otherwise untouched. No footprints, no marks, no explanation. We didn't talk about it over breakfast, but when I caught Emily packing the cabinets with travel mugs and paper plates, I didn't stop her. We were leaving, or at least that's what we thought. We started breaking camp before the sun had burned the mist off the creek. Emily moved quickly, like the sooner we were packed, the sooner she could breathe again. I worked the stabilizers, disconnected the hoses, and checked the hitch. Neither of us spoke. The mist clung low, curling around my boots, making the gravel road vanish just a few feet ahead. Every sound seemed close. The creak of metal, the snap of a twig, the faint whisper of fabric as Emily folded the camp chairs. By the time I climbed into the driver's seat of the truck, I felt the first real relief I'd had in days. I turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. I tried again. This time, it didn't even catch. Just a flat, dry click. Emily's hands froze on the door handle. "You just serviced it last month," she said, like that fact should have been enough to make the engine start. I popped the hood, but the battery cables were tight, the terminals clean. I checked the gauge, full charge. Nothing about it made sense. And then I realized the mist wasn't thinning. It was getting thicker, rolling in from the ridge, swallowing the tree line. Within minutes, the far side of the creek was gone. The air felt damp and heavy in my mouth, like I was breathing through wet cloth. That's when the knock started. Not 3 anymore. 1, slow and deliberate. A pause, then another. The sound wasn't coming from one place. It was moving, circling the hollow. Each knock seemed to land closer until I could feel them through the ground. Emily slid back into the camper and shut the door. I followed, locking it behind me, though I knew the thin metal walls wouldn't keep much out. We sat in the dinette, listening. The knocks faded. The silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence we'd known before. This one had texture, a faint, low vibration like a distant hum just under the edge of hearing. It made the air feel alive in the wrong way, as if it were waiting for something. I checked my watch. The second hand wasn't moving. I tapped the glass. Nothing. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen was black. No battery warning. No flicker. Just dead. Emily's phone was the same. She whispered, "It doesn't want us to leave." I didn't ask what it was. We both knew we couldn't name it. The breathing started again then, louder than ever, not outside, but beneath us, under the floor of the camper. Long inhales that lifted the air in the room, followed by slow, damp exhales that seemed to sink into our skin. Emily's knuckles went white around the edge of the table. I reached for the flashlight, but the beam wouldn't cut more than a few feet into the mist outside the windows. The breathing stopped. The hum deepened. And then, somewhere out in the white wall of fog, we heard it. The sound of dogs barking. Not wild, panicked barks, but sharp warning calls. For a moment, I felt a surge of hope. If the dogs were barking, maybe they could drive whatever this was back. Maybe they could break the silence. But the barking cut off mid-yelp, like a hand had reached out and closed over it. Emily's voice cracked when she said, "They never bark here." We didn't move for a long time after that. The mist pressed closer, curling along the sides of the camper, dimming the daylight until it felt like evening again. When it finally broke, when the fog thinned and the ridgetops reappeared, it was late afternoon. The truck started on the first turn of the key. We didn't question it. We didn't check the site one last time. We just drove, the tires throwing gravel behind us, the hollow shrinking in the mirrors until it was gone. Or at least, it should have been gone. The road out twisted between steep ridges, our trailer swaying gently behind us. Neither of us spoke. The relief I thought I'd feel wasn't there. It was more like we'd slipped out of a room without shutting the door behind us, afraid of the sound it might make. I kept glancing at the mirrors. The hollow was out of sight now, swallowed by the folds of the land, but the mist had followed. It clung to the treetops in thin ribbons, drifting just low enough to graze the road ahead. 5 miles on, we passed a farmstead, the first sign of people we'd seen since pulling in 2 nights ago. A wide pasture, a split-rail fence, and 3 dogs lying in the shade of a porch. None of them looked up as we passed. I slowed, hoping for some sign of normalcy. A twitch of an ear, the flick of a tail. But they stayed still, eyes fixed on the far ridge as if something there held them. Emily's hand found my arm. "They're breathing," she said. It took me a second to understand. The dog's chests rose and fell in perfect unison. Slow inhale, long exhale. Just like the sound we'd heard in the hollow. I pressed the accelerator. The road narrowed, the trees closing in, their branches laced overhead like fingers. The light dimmed again, and with it came that same low vibration, barely audible but present enough to rattle in my ribs. Emily turned on the radio. Static. She tried another station. More static, but beneath it, 3 slow knocks. I killed the radio. The knocks didn't stop. They were inside the cab now, or maybe under the floorboards. Each one was heavy enough that I could feel it through the steering wheel. The mist thickened again, curling around the hood, erasing the lines of the road. I slowed to a crawl, my hands tight on the wheel. Then I saw it in the headlights. Just for a second. Something pale, standing at the edge of the asphalt, its head tilted like it was listening. It didn't move as we passed, but its shape blurred in the rear view until I couldn't tell if it was still there or if the mist had swallowed it whole. Emily was rigid in her seat, her eyes forward. "Don't stop," she said. We didn't speak again until we reached the main highway, a wide stretch of sunlit asphalt where the world finally felt open. The mist was gone. The vibration in my chest faded. For the first time in days, I could hear the wind. We drove until nightfall, stopping at a busy RV park near a small town. The lot was full, generators humming, laughter carrying from a campfire 2 sites over. It should have felt safe. But when I stepped out of the truck, I realized it was too quiet between the other sounds, as if the air itself was listening. And somewhere, just at the edge of hearing, came a single deliberate knock. I didn't sleep much that night, even with the noise of the RV park around us. Emily drifted off around midnight, but I lay in bed listening for something I couldn't name. Not a knock, not breathing, but the pause before either could happen. When I did doze, I dreamed of the hollow. Not of what we'd seen there, but of the space itself. The way the ridges folded in, the way the creek seemed to whisper beneath the stillness, the way the air pressed close like it had hands. And in the dream, I was walking toward the sound of dogs barking. But when I reached them, they weren't moving, their eyes fixed on me, their chests rising and falling in that same slow, deliberate rhythm. I woke just before dawn, heart pounding. We stayed at that park one more night, then moved on, drifting west into Oklahoma. But the farther we got from Benton Creek, the more I realized the hollow hadn't stayed behind. The silence traveled differently now. It would slip in during the pauses in conversation, or in the empty moments between the hum of the road and the thump of tires over expansion joints. It didn't need the trees or the mist. And sometimes when I walked the dog paths at a rest stop or stood alone at a gas pump, I'd feel the air shift. That same faint vibration in my ribs, that same prickle along the back of my neck. And I'd think about the old man in the rust-colored truck. Dogs don't like it here. I understand now it wasn't just the hollow he meant. I don't take Emily to remote campgrounds anymore. I stick to the busy places where the noise never really stops, where there's always someone walking past your site or calling out across the lot. But still, there are moments, even here, when the sound cuts out. And if I listen too hard, I can almost hear it again. 3 slow knocks, patient as a heartbeat. It's not the noise that keeps me awake now. It's the knowing what comes after it stops. I've always been drawn to the idea of camping in the uncharted. Those places where most people are too cautious to go. You know, the places off the beaten path. The places that promise to hold stories, adventures, and mysteries. But there's a fine line between a hidden gem and something that's meant to stay forgotten. And let me tell you, I learned that the hard way. It started like any other trip. I was in my Volkswagen, cruising through the southern part of Utah, chasing the quiet of the backcountry, hoping to find the kind of solitude that most people will never understand. But I wasn't looking for just any campground. No, I wanted something more, something that felt alive. There are countless reports of people having strange encounters at old ghost towns, abandoned settlements, or in my case, long-forgotten mines. I found out about the place from a local, a man named Bill, probably in his mid-60s, who'd lived around the area his whole life. I pulled into a little convenience store on the edge of town, hoping to grab some supplies before heading out into the wild. The store was run down, with creaky wooden floors and an air that smelled like dust and stale coffee. Bill was behind the counter, leaning on the edge of it, chewing on a toothpick. He looked at me like he'd seen me before and down, but I knew I was just another stranger passing through. Headin'. Out to the mines, huh? He said, his voice gruff, the kind of voice you get after too many years of living with the wind and sun. Yeah, just thought I'd camp near one of the old sites. Heard there's a place up in the hills. He gave me a long look, and for a moment, I thought he might warn me off. But then he just nodded and spat into a tin can beside him. Don't say I didn't warn you. Those mines, they ain't what they used to be. You're asking for trouble if you go poking around. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but his words stuck with me. I was used to hearing warnings from locals. It was part of the charm of exploring places no one else dared to. But something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. He seemed almost too casual about it, like he was resigned to whatever had happened there. Thanks for the heads up, I said, forcing a smile before grabbing the last of the supplies I needed and heading back to my van. As I drove away, the thought of those abandoned mines lingered in my mind, like an itch I couldn't scratch. I'd heard stories before, of course, the kind of tales you tell around a campfire when the wind starts howling and the fire is getting low. But as I turned down a dusty, overgrown road towards my destination, I felt something shift in the air. The trees began to feel like they were watching me. The road was narrower now, winding, more treacherous. The further I went, the more isolated everything became. And I mean really isolated. The kind of silence that presses in on you, making you hyper-aware of every sound, every small movement. There was no sign of life. Not a single other vehicle, not a single other person. The kind of place where if something went wrong, you'd be on your own. I found a flat spot to park the Volkswagen, close enough to the base of the mountains where the mine was supposed to be, but not too close to the shaft itself. There were no signs, no markers, no warnings, just the faded remains of a long-forgotten trail. The wind had picked up, swirling dust around my feet as I opened the van door. The temperature dropped, but it wasn't the kind of cold that felt natural, more like the land was shivering, holding something back. I set up camp quickly, eager to get my bearings, but there was something about the place that made me uneasy. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The sun sank low and the shadows stretched long across the ground. It was time to get a fire going. The crackling flames were a small comfort against the vast emptiness, and the smell of burning wood briefly filled the air, masking the faint, metallic tang of the ground beneath me. But even as I sat there, warming my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The first strange thing happened as night fully settled in. The air had become still, eerily so. The wind had died completely, and with it the usual sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of animals. It was as if the world had gone mute. Then, a distant noise. At first, I thought it was just the wind shifting through the trees. But as it came closer, I realized it wasn't the wind at all. It was a soft, rhythmic sound, almost like footsteps, but there was no one around. I stood up quickly, my breath catching in my throat. My heart began to race, the adrenaline kicking in. My mind tried to rationalize it, just an animal, maybe a deer or a coyote. But the sound was too deliberate, too consistent. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the safety of the fire's glow, my footsteps muffled by the dirt beneath me. The light bounced off the surrounding trees, casting strange shadows that twisted unnaturally. Then I saw it, a figure barely visible in the dark, moving slowly between the trees, just out of reach of the light. My heart skipped a beat. I froze for a moment, trying to figure out what I was seeing. A person? A shadow? It was hard to tell. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking a little. No response. But the figure didn't stop. It kept moving, its silhouette shifting with the flicker of the flashlight. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. Someone else out here, a fellow camper, perhaps. But the more I stared, the more I realized something wasn't right. The figure wasn't walking like a normal person. There was an unnatural fluidity to its movements, as if it was gliding more than walking. I took a few cautious steps forward, calling out again, but it never turned around. It never acknowledged me. It just kept moving. I stopped, suddenly aware of how much silence surrounded me. Not even the wind was making a sound anymore. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something was out there, and it was watching me. The air around me seemed to grow colder, and I couldn't help but notice the creeping, darkening shadows that stretched across the ground. The way the trees seemed to lean closer, almost as if they were reaching for me. I'd made a mistake. I wasn't supposed to be here. I turned quickly, heart hammering in my chest. My feet moved faster than my mind could process, as if my body instinctively understood that staying out there any longer was a dangerous decision. The sound of footsteps, now unmistakably echoing behind me, urged me to pick up the pace, but my legs felt sluggish, as if the earth itself was pulling me down. I reached the van in a panic, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys in my pocket. I glanced over my shoulder, but the figure had disappeared. The shadows seemed to swallow everything that had once been there, leaving nothing but the heavy silence of the night. I slid into the van, locking the door with trembling hands, and leaned back against the seat. The engine wasn't running, but I could feel the hum of the van beneath me. Like it, too, was aware of the danger. The sudden weight of the silence felt suffocating. It was a silence that wasn't normal, a silence that seemed to press in on me, suffocating every thought I had. The fire outside was dying, leaving only the crackle of dying embers. The shadows from outside seemed to stretch even further into the van's interior, reaching around the edges of the windows, casting long, thin fingers toward me. I tried to shake the feeling, but the unease was growing, knotting itself tight inside my stomach. I wanted to leave. I really did. But I couldn't. Not yet. I knew something wasn't right about this place, about the mine, about the land, but I couldn't bring myself to just drive away. My curiosity was gnawing at me, pushing me to find out what was really out there, what was hiding in those abandoned shafts. As the minutes passed, the weight of isolation started to press harder against me. The van, which had always felt like my safe space, suddenly seemed fragile, too thin to protect me from whatever was lurking outside. I sat there for what felt like hours, the night dragging on in complete stillness, only broken by the occasional creak of the van as it settled into the cool earth. And then, out of nowhere, came another sound. Soft, barely audible, but undeniable. A whisper. I immediately shot upright, my body tense, adrenaline surging. I couldn't make out the words, if it was even words at all, but the sound was there, coming from just outside the van. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was something else entirely. I held my breath, straining to listen. There it was again, a low, unintelligible murmur that seemed to rise from the earth itself. It felt like it was coming from under the van, from deep within the ground beneath me, as if the mine itself was calling out. The whisper grew louder, and with it came an oppressive feeling that I couldn't shake off. I was being pulled into something that wasn't meant to be seen. Something old, something forgotten. The sense of dread was overwhelming, clawing its way into my chest, wrapping around my heart like a vice. I had to get out of there. I scrambled for the ignition, my fingers slipping on the key. The whispering hadn't stopped. It was like it was inside my head now, curling through my thoughts, pulling me deeper into whatever this place was. The engine roared to life, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the start of something worse. I slammed the van into gear and sped off down the overgrown trail, my tires kicking up dirt and rocks behind me. The headlights cut through the night, but the shadows from the mine seemed to follow, creeping into the periphery of my vision. I drove for what felt like forever, not daring to look in the rearview mirror, afraid of what I might see. The road was narrow and winding, twisting through the hills, each curve a reminder that I was still deep in the heart of nowhere. The further I drove, the more the eerie whispers seemed to linger in the air, like they were tied to the land itself, refusing to let me leave. And then, just as suddenly as they had started, the whispers stopped. The silence returned. But it wasn't a comforting silence. It was a hollow silence, like the land had swallowed up everything, the fear, the whispers, the very sound of my breathing. My eyes were glued to the road, but in the dim light, something caught my attention. A figure stood at the edge of the road, silhouetted by the headlights. I slammed my foot on the brake, heart leaping into my throat. The figure didn't move. It was still, watching me. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew it was connected to everything. The mines, the whispers, the shadows. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure stepped forward, just enough that I could see it more clearly. And then I realized it was just a man, standing there, barefoot, his clothes ragged, his face pale and drawn. He was staring at me, but there was no expression on his face, no recognition. He didn't move a muscle. I didn't know what to do. Was he part of the strange happenings in the mine? Had he been wandering out there for years, waiting for someone to find him? I pressed the accelerator down harder, trying to put distance between us. The van lurched forward, tires spinning, but when I looked back in the rearview mirror, he was gone. The road seemed to stretch on forever, and by the time I reached a paved highway, the weight of what had happened began to settle in. The mine, the whispers, the man. Everything that had been lurking just beneath the surface. I had barely escaped. The next day, I made my way back into town. I didn't speak to anyone, didn't ask about the mine or the man or the whispers. I knew deep down that some things weren't meant to be understood, that some places were better left undisturbed. But one thing was clear to me now. The land has its own stories, and sometimes it doesn't want to share them. I learned my lesson the hard way. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the obvious threat. It's the thing you can't see, the thing that doesn't make a sound until it's too late. I left Utah behind, but the mine still calls to me in the quiet moments, whispering, asking me to return. But I won't. I learned that there's power in knowing when to turn away. Some places are better left forgotten. I remember the first night because of the way the air moved. It was the kind of stillness that should have been calming, yet every breath I took felt like it was pulled through something unseen, like the forest was holding it for a moment before giving it back. I was parked at a campground along the edge of an old state park in northern Wisconsin, a place I hadn't planned to stop at until the daylight started bleeding out faster than I expected. My RV sat in the farthest loop near a row of empty sites, each with their own wooden posts and fire rings. When I checked in, the camp host had smiled the way people do when they've been alone too long, too much eye contact, the corners of his mouth trembling like he was unsure if this was his cue to speak or to stay quiet. He told me my site was the most private one, which I thought was a good thing at the time. I didn't realize until later that privacy out here didn't mean solitude. It meant distance. The sun was gone within minutes of me leveling the RV. A thin orange lantern light flickered in the distance near the host's cabin, the only real glow against the encroaching dark. I could hear water somewhere, a slow lap against rock, steady but too far away to see. I've been camping most of my life. I've learned that darkness is usually just darkness, and the sounds it carries are rarely dangerous. But that first night, the silence between the sounds was the thing that got to me. I could hear my own movements too clearly. The squeak of the step as I climbed inside, the sigh of the door as it latched, my boots against the vinyl floor. I cooked a quick meal, ate with the radio low, and kept glancing out the narrow window beside the sink. Nothing moved. Not even the trees. When I finally killed the lights, I thought I saw something pale between the pines. Just for a moment, the kind of glimpse you get when your brain is still adjusting to night. I told myself it was just the moon slipping between clouds. I tried to sleep. It must have been an hour later when I heard the first knock. Not on the RV itself, not close. It was somewhere out in the trees. 2 short taps, spaced apart just enough that I knew it wasn't a branch falling or an animal. My first thought was another camper, maybe someone out for a late walk. But it came again, softer this time from a slightly different angle. I sat up in bed listening. The knocks didn't follow any rhythm I recognized. They were deliberate, but spaced irregularly. 2 in a row, then nothing for a long stretch, then 1, then 3. Always distant, always moving. I'm not the type to spook easily, but there's something about hearing a sound you can't place in a place you're supposed to feel safe. I slipped on a jacket, stepped out onto the gravel pad, and stood listening in the cold. The lantern light by the host's cabin was gone. My breath came out in slow puffs. The knocks had stopped. I stayed out there longer than I should have, telling myself I was just being cautious. But the thing about the forest at night is, it listens back. It waits for you to make the mistake of thinking it's empty. When I finally went inside, I locked the door and pulled the shades, even though I almost never bother at campgrounds. I must have slept eventually, because I woke to the sound of footsteps on gravel, slow, unhurried, stopping just shy of my door. My skin went tight. I waited for a knock, for something, but there was nothing but the faint shift of weight, like whoever it was had turned. Then without a sound, they were gone. Morning came, gray and cold. My sight looked exactly as I'd left it, but I noticed something strange about the ground near the edge of the trees. The pine needles had been disturbed, not in the scattered way deer or raccoons moved them, but brushed aside in narrow, deliberate paths, as if someone had walked slowly back and forth along the tree line. I told myself it could have been anything. But as I poured my coffee, I noticed something leaning against the picnic table. It was an old lantern, not mine. Its glass was cloudy, the metal dented, but when I lifted it, it was warm. That was when I started thinking about leaving. I held that lantern for a long moment, feeling the faint heat in my palm like it was the only thing tethering me to the moment. No one had been to my site since I arrived. I was sure of it. Yet someone had to have set it there recently, and with enough care that I hadn't heard them. I scanned the tree line, expecting to see the camp host or maybe another early riser from a nearby site, but the loop was empty. Even the frost on the grass had no footprints but my own. I should have brought it straight to the host's cabin, but something about it made me hesitate. It didn't feel like lost property. It felt left, placed for me to find. When I finally walked it down to the host's place, I noticed the cabin door was ajar. The lantern I'd seen glowing outside last night was gone, leaving the front in shadow. I knocked, called out, and heard nothing but the hollow echo inside. The air in there was stale and faintly metallic, like old pennies. The host's truck was still parked out front. I thought about stepping inside, but the thought of standing in another man's empty home without permission didn't sit right. I set the lantern on the porch, gave one more knock, and walked back toward my site with a knot tightening in my stomach. That's when I noticed the signs posted on some of the unused sites. They weren't the standard reserved notices. They were small, weathered boards nailed to the posts, each painted with a single word: walk. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. The state park's trail map didn't mention anything called the walk, but the signs weren't new. They'd been there long enough for the paint to fade, long enough to feel permanent. By midday, the campground still hadn't woken up. No cars pulling in, no kids riding bikes, no sound of splitting wood. I decided to take a short hike to clear my head, partly to shake the weirdness off, partly to prove to myself there was nothing out here but trees and frozen ground. The main trail looped down toward the lake. It was bigger than I expected, the water flat and black under the overcast sky. A wooden dock jutted out into the middle, the boards warped and slick with ice. Halfway down the shoreline, I found another lantern. This one was newer, the glass clear, the metal polished. It sat upright in the sand, unlit but clean, like it had been placed there minutes ago. I left it where it was. The thing about being alone in the woods is you start bargaining with your own instincts. You feel that prickle at the back of your neck and tell yourself it's just the cold. You hear a sound in the trees and tell yourself it's just the wind. But there's a point where the voice that's telling you to ignore it stops sounding like yours. By the time I got back to camp, the light was already thinning out. Winter days don't last long this far north. I cooked dinner early, kept the radio on low, and decided that if nothing happened tonight, I'd leave in the morning. Just after sunset, I heard the knocks again, same pattern as before, deliberate but irregular, always moving. Only this time they were closer. I stepped outside with my flashlight, scanning the trees. The beam caught a glint of glass, not eyes, but another lantern hanging from a low branch maybe 30 feet in. The knocks stopped as soon as I saw it. I stayed there longer than I meant to, the cold creeping into my jacket before finally stepping toward it. My boots crunched over the frost. The lantern swayed slightly like it had just been hung. I reached up, fingers brushing the handle, and the woods behind me cracked with the sound of someone taking a single heavy step. I spun, light sweeping through empty trees. The air felt wrong, heavier, as if the night had thickened around me. I didn't run, but I walked fast, the lantern still in my hand, until I was back in the glow of my RV's porch light. I locked the door, drew the shades, set the lantern on the counter, telling myself I was only keeping it to bring to the ranger station tomorrow. That night, I dreamed of walking. Not hiking, not wandering, but a slow, endless walk along a trail I couldn't see, lit only by the lantern in my hand. I could hear footsteps just behind me, perfectly in time with mine. When I tried to turn, the trail curved in a way that kept me facing forward. When I woke, my boots were damp. I didn't believe it at first. I stood there barefoot on the vinyl floor, staring at the boots by the door, the thin crust of dirt and wet pine needles clinging to the soles. I touched them just to feel the chill for myself, to convince myself this wasn't some dream I was dragging into waking life. The damp was real. The smell of forest floor clung to them, not just the sharp scent of pine, but the darker, earth-heavy smell you only notice when you've been deep among the trees. The worst part was that they were placed differently than I'd left them. I always lined my boots side by side, laces tucked inside. Now they were slightly splayed, toes turned outward, like I'd stepped out of them mid-stride. I didn't leave the RV for hours that morning. I made coffee, ate breakfast, and kept glancing at the lantern on the counter. In the daylight, it didn't look sinister. Just a simple camping lantern, the kind you might find in a thrift shop. But I couldn't shake the way the metal had felt warm in my hand last night, as though it had been burning without flame. Around noon, I finally saw another person, a woman, maybe in her 60s, walking along the main road with a plastic bag of groceries. She wore a parka, 2 sizes too big, and a knit hat pulled down to her eyebrows. I stepped outside and called a greeting. She slowed, studied me for a moment, then walked closer. "You're in Site 12, she said, not asking. I nodded. She looked past me toward my RV, her eyes landing on the lantern through the window. Her jaw tightened. "Don't take it past the line," she said. "What line?" I asked. She glanced toward the trees at the far end of the loop. "You'll know if you cross it." And then she kept walking, leaving a trail of boot prints in the frost. I almost chased after her, but something about her tone, flat, certain, not unkind but final, made me let her go. By late afternoon, the air had that charged stillness again, the kind that presses down on you like the moment before a storm. I found myself pacing inside, checking the windows, counting the hours until full dark. And then I heard it, the first knock. Not in the trees this time, but on the wooden picnic table outside. 2 short taps followed by the faint sound of glass clinking. I froze, listening. Another knock, slower this time, almost hesitant. Then footsteps, the soft, deliberate crunch of someone walking toward the tree line. Against every instinct, I opened the door. There was a third lantern sitting in the center of the picnic table. This one burned with a steady flame, the wick low, the light warm and pulsing. Beyond it, at the edge of the trees, I saw the shape of someone holding another lantern. They didn't move. For a long moment, I stood there in the doorway, trying to decide if I was seeing a person or just the suggestion of one, a shape made of shadows and light. And then it turned. Slowly. The lantern it held swung once, and I swear the sound it made, the faint squeak of the handle against metal, was the same sound I'd heard in my dream. It began walking away, deeper into the trees. I should have shut the door. I should have stayed inside. Instead, I stepped forward, one hand on the cold metal of the table, the other reaching for the burning lantern. It was heavier than I expected, the glass warm enough to sting my fingertips. I don't remember making the decision to follow. One moment I was standing there, the next I was moving toward the tree line. Lantern in hand, my boots crunching over frost the same way they had in the dream. The figure stayed just far enough ahead that I couldn't make out details. Tall, slow, never turning to look back. The deeper we went, the more the air changed. It didn't get colder exactly, but it felt thicker, harder to pull into my lungs. My ears rang faintly, and I began to lose the sound of my own footsteps under the rhythmic creak of the lantern's handle swinging ahead of me. Then, without warning, the figure stopped. The light it carried swayed once, then went still. I took another step and felt the ground change under me. Not dirt, not pine needles, but something hard and flat, like stone. The trees on either side of me leaned in, their trunks warping slightly as if bending toward the path. That's when I realized I couldn't see the campground anymore. The stone under my boots was slick with moisture, the kind that never quite freezes. I lifted the lantern, trying to see more than a few feet ahead, but the light only caught the glint of wet rock and the faint steam rising from it. The figure stood motionless farther down the path, its own lantern casting a steady honey-colored halo that swallowed its face in shadow. I thought about the old woman's warning. Don't take it past the line. I didn't know what line she meant, but something told me I'd already crossed it. I turned, hoping to retrace my steps, but the path behind me no longer looked like the one I'd walked. The trees were different here. Their trunks pale, almost gray, their bark smooth and patterned with thin, dark slashes like tally marks. No frost on the ground, no pine needles, no scent of sap. I swallowed hard and forced my voice steady. Hey! The figure didn't respond. I took a step closer, boots echoing slightly against the stone. The sound was wrong, too sharp for an outdoor space, as though I were walking in some enclosed tunnel I couldn't see. My lantern's flame trembled, and I realized my hand was shaking. The figure began walking again, slower than before. I followed without meaning to, my steps sinking to theirs. It was like being pulled along by a rope tied around my chest. Every few yards, another lantern appeared by the path, set on the ground or hanging from low branches, some old and rusted, some new, some with flame, some with only the faint scent of burnt oil left behind. I couldn't tell how far we'd gone, only that the air was heavier here. My breath came shallow, like there wasn't quite enough oxygen. I began to notice other sounds too, faint, rhythmic ones, just under the edge of hearing. They were spaced like footsteps, but not mine or the figure's. Too light, too quick, and coming from both sides of the path. I told myself it was just the creak of the trees, the echo of my own movements, the weird acoustics of the stone. But then one of those faint steps landed close enough to the edge of the light that I saw the ripple of movement in the undergrowth, low to the ground, keeping pace. The figure ahead of me stopped again. This time it turned slightly, enough for me to see its profile, not in detail, but enough to know it wasn't anyone from the campground. The jaw was too long, the neck too still, the shape somehow bent without looking broken. My throat went dry. The lantern in its hand lifted, tilting toward me in a slow, deliberate gesture as if it were offering me something unseen. And then, from somewhere behind the trees, the knocking started again. It wasn't like before, not sparse, not searching. This was steady, measured, like a drum beat marking time for the walk. The figure turned forward and kept going. I hesitated for half a breath before following. The path narrowed, the lanterns became fewer, and the sound of the knocking shifted, now echoing from ahead as well as behind. My chest felt tight, my skin damp despite the cold. Every instinct screamed to turn around, but my legs kept moving. Eventually, the path opened into a small clearing. In the center stood a single massive stone, its surface flat and slick. Around it were lanterns of every kind. Dozens, maybe hundreds, some upright, some tipped over, all blackened with soot. The figure stepped to the stone, set its lantern on top, and finally looked at me full on. There was no face. Not blank skin, not shadow, just a hollow, lantern-shaped void where its head should have been. Inside, a flame burned low and steady, its light spilling out in thin, trembling beams. The knocking stopped. The air stilled. I felt the pull on my chest tighten, drawing me toward the stone. I froze at the edge of the clearing, the lantern in my hand trembling with the pulse in my wrist. Something shifted in the trees beyond the stone. Not wind. There hadn't been any wind all night. It was the sound of bodies adjusting their weight, of boots or bare feet pressing into soil. Slow, deliberate. Surrounding me, the figure with the hollow lantern head didn't move, didn't speak. The flame inside its void flickered once, as though stirred by a breath I couldn't feel. Then another light appeared in the trees, and another, and another. One by one, lanterns glowed to life, weaving their way toward the clearing. They weren't carried like mine. They floated at chest height, their light spilling over figures that moved just wrong enough to make my eyes hurt. Tall shapes, thin shapes, some stooped, some gliding, all silent except for the faint scrape of their feet. They gathered in a wide circle around the stone, stopping just short of the ring of unlit, blackened lanterns on the ground. Each figure held their own light, different colors, different intensities, yet none of it pushed away the shadows between them. It was like their glow wasn't meant to illuminate, only to mark presence. My throat felt tight, my breath shallow. I wanted to speak, to demand answers, but the words were lodged somewhere behind my ribs. The hollow-headed figure reached out, one hand toward me. The fingers were long, too many joints, the skin pale in a way that wasn't skin at all, a sort of translucent glaze that caught the light without reflecting it. It didn't touch me, just hovered there, waiting. The knocking started again. Not from a distance this time, but all around us, in perfect unison. The sound bounced off the trees and the stone, syncopated with the pounding in my ears. My grip on my lantern tightened. The circle of shapes began to walk. Not toward me, not toward the stone, around it. Slow, steady, each step landing in rhythm with the knocks. The hollow-headed figure stepped closer to me, gesturing subtly with its hand as though inviting me to join the rotation. Every instinct screamed to run, but something in the air held me there, thick and suffocating. I realized my boots had shifted again. My toes were turned outward, my stance widening without me noticing, like my body was aligning itself to their pace. The knocks grew louder, faster. The circle tightened, the light from their lanterns pressing in until I could see the details of their forms. Some looked almost human. Others looked like they'd started human, but had been stretched, bent, or hollowed in ways I couldn't name. None had eyes, only the lights they carried, as if that was all that was left them. I took one step forward, then another. The moment my boot touched the slick stone at the center, the knocks stopped dead. The clearing went silent, except for my own ragged breathing. The hollow-headed figure stepped back, leaving me alone in the center. The stone was warmer than it should have been. My lantern's flames surged higher, throwing shadows up the trunks of the trees until it looked like the whole forest was leaning in to watch. Then, in perfect unison, every lantern in the circle went out. I was left in total darkness, the weight of the air pressing down like water. And somewhere in that black, Something began to breathe. It was a slow, steady breath. Not mine. Not human. Each exhale was warm against my face, though I couldn't see the source. The stone beneath me vibrated faintly with the rhythm of it, as if the breath belonged to something enormous buried just below. I turned, holding my lantern out, but its flame was gone. No glow, no warmth, just dead glass reflecting nothing. Yet I could still see. Not with my eyes, not exactly. Shapes pulsed faintly in the black, like embers under ash, fading in and out. The circle of figures was still there, their lanterns extinguished, but I could sense them. Waiting. The breathing deepened. I could feel it now in my chest, sinking with my own, forcing me into its rhythm. Every inhale pulled something from me, every exhale pushed something back in. My thoughts felt sluggish, stretched thin, as though they weren't entirely mine anymore. Then, one step forward. I didn't take it, but my body did. The stone under my boots ended abruptly, my foot landing on damp earth. Another step, and another. The circle parted soundlessly to let me pass, their hollow shapes leaning in just enough that I could hear the faint creak of their joints. Somewhere in the black, a single knock sounded. I walked toward it without hesitation. My mind was screaming, loud, desperate, but my body moved like it had rehearsed this. The knocks came again, farther ahead. Every time I drew close, they retreated, pulling me deeper into the unseen. The ground sloped downward, my boots slipped once on wet rock, and a hand, not mine, caught my arm. Long fingers, cold and unyielding, steadying me just long enough for me to continue. It should have felt like hours. It didn't. Time thinned here. My thoughts came in fragments. The crunch of leaves, the smell of burnt oil, the faint metallic tang in the air. The knocks slowed again, almost gentle now, until I stepped onto something new. Wood. It flexed slightly under my weight. I glanced down. Nothing but black. Yet I knew the sound of a dock when I felt it. Water lapped somewhere below, though the air was still heavy with that warm breath. At the dock's far end, a faint light appeared. A lantern, swaying as though in a wind I couldn't feel. The same honey-colored glow I'd seen from the figure before. I moved toward it, each board groaning underfoot. Halfway there, the knocks started behind me. Louder now. Closer. And with them came footsteps, too many to count, all in unison, closing the distance. I wanted to run, but my body only quickened its walk, just enough to reach the lantern at the dock's end. When I did, I saw it wasn't hanging from a post. It was sitting in the hands of someone crouched low, their head bowed. They wore the camp host's jacket. "Don't stop," he whispered, without lifting his face. "Don't ever stop." And then he pushed the lantern into my chest. The moment I took it, the footsteps broke from their rhythm. They scattered, swarming the dock, the boards shuddering under their weight. The warm breath vanished, replaced by air so cold it burned my throat. I turned and saw nothing but a wall of lanterns rushing toward me, each carried by something that moved too fast to track. I stepped back once, twice, and the dock was gone. My heel landed on solid earth, frost crunching underfoot. I was standing in my campsite. The frost under my boots was untouched, except for my own prints leading from the edge of the trees. The air was still, colorless in the pre-dawn light. My RV sat exactly as I'd left it, shades drawn, door locked. The picnic table was bare, no lantern, no sign of what had happened. For a moment, I thought I'd dreamed it, that I'd fallen asleep early, that all of it, the clearing, the figures, the dock, the host's voice, had been stitched together in my head. But the lantern in my hands was still warm. I set it on the step and fished my keys from my jacket. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, and the cold metal of the key scraped uselessly at the lock until I forced myself to breathe slow to steady it. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first, not musty like a closed-up RV, but the same faint metallic tang from the clearing, sharp and thin in the back of my throat. I stepped inside, shutting the door hard behind me. Everything looked normal. My coat hung by the door, the coffee pot sat clean in the sink, my bed was made, but the air inside felt crowded, like someone had been here, just stepped out of sight. I moved toward the counter to set the lantern down and froze. There was already one sitting there, Identical. Same glass, same dent on the handle, cold to the touch. The knock came from somewhere inside. It wasn't loud, just two sharp taps against the far wall, near the bed. I turned toward it slowly, heart hammering in my ears. Another knock, this time on the ceiling, directly above me. I told myself it could be branches, a bird, something mundane. I told myself that twice, 3 times, until the third knock came from inside the floor under my feet. The metallic smell deepened, carrying with it a faint hint of burnt oil. My skin prickled and I became aware of the smallest sound, not the knocks now, but the steady creak of weight shifting on the narrow RV steps outside. I stood frozen, listening. The creak came again, and then, just under it, the soft scrape of glass against metal. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. The first knock on the door was so gentle I almost missed it. The second one wasn't. My fingers twitched toward the latch, then stopped. I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep them out or keep whatever was inside from leaving. The knocks came again, faster now, in no pattern I recognized. Some on the door, some on the walls, some from the floor. And beneath it all, faint but clear, the camp host's voice, "Don't stop." My chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself. I backed toward the bed, my boot catching on something, the damp laces of the pair I'd worn in my dream. They were resting exactly as they had been that first morning, toes turned outward. The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was only the hum of the fridge and the faint wheeze of my own breathing. I thought maybe, finally, it was over. Then the lanterns, both of them, lit at once. The light from the 2 lanterns wasn't bright. It was the same warm, low burn I'd seen in the clearing, but it filled the RV like it was spilling out from every surface. Shadows warped on the walls, stretching and curling, bending in ways that made me dizzy to follow. I backed toward the door without realizing it, my hand closing around the latch. The air inside had grown heavier, warmer, as if the small space was breathing along with me. The metallic smell was sharper now, mixed with the faint scent of wet stone. When I opened the door, the cold hit me like a wall. The campground wasn't as I'd left it. The frost was gone, replaced by a thin layer of damp leaves that glistened in the lantern light spilling from my doorway. The trees loomed closer to my sight, their trunks slick and pale, bark marked with the same thin tally-like slashes I'd seen past the line, and between them, hanging low, were lanterns. Dozens of them. They swayed slowly, though there was no wind. I stepped out, one boot on the gravel, the other still on the RV step, torn between retreating and committing to the ground. That was when I saw movement between the trees, shapes gliding from lantern to lantern, their forms half swallowed by shadow until they passed beneath the light, revealing that same glaze-pale skin and 2 long joints. They weren't rushing me. They were positioning themselves. The knocks began again, not from one direction, but from all around the loop. They weren't loud, not yet, but they had the steady rhythm of a guide calling out the pace. And then, through the trees, I saw the host. He was standing still, maybe 20 feet away, a lantern in each hand. His jacket hung open, shirt torn at the shoulder, skin beneath streaked with dirt. His mouth moved, but his voice carried in that strange, hollow way sound travels over water. "You don't get to stay here," he said. "Not unless you walk." He lifted one lantern toward me, just high enough for its light to catch the ground at his feet. I saw the path there, not gravel, not dirt, but the same slick stone from the clearing vanishing into the dark. My throat went dry. "What happens if I don't?" His head tilted. For a second I thought he might actually answer. But then the figures in the trees began to close in, their lanterns bobbing in sync with the knocks. The sound was louder now, urgent, the pace quickening. The host didn't move toward me. He didn't need to. I understood. My boots were already turning outward, my stance falling into the rhythm I'd felt before. The pull in my chest was back, subtle but undeniable. Behind me, inside the RV, the 2 lanterns on the counter flared so bright I could see my own shadow stretch across the campsite. When the light dimmed again, my feet were already on the stone. The knocks fell into perfect time, echoing in my ribs. The host stepped onto the path ahead of me. The shapes followed behind, and just like before, I walked. The stone path curved gently at first, the kind of turn you take without thinking. But the longer I walked, the more it seemed like the trees were shifting to follow the bend, their trunks leaning inward over the trail, branches knitting together until the sky was nothing but a narrow strip above me. The lanterns hanging along the way swayed in perfect rhythm with the knocks, not just back and forth, but all together, like they were connected by some invisible thread. Their glow wasn't steady anymore either. It pulsed, almost like it was keeping time with my heartbeat. The host stayed ahead of me, his pace unchanging, never looking back. Every so often, he'd raise one of his lanterns just high enough for the light to hit the slick stone ahead, and I'd see that the path wasn't like normal rock. The surface seemed to ripple slightly when the light touched it, as if it were soft beneath my boots, though I couldn't feel it through the soles. I don't know how long we walked. It might have been minutes. It might have been hours. My sense of time felt smeared thin, stretched like taffy. And then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The sound of the knocks had changed. They were still in rhythm, still perfectly timed, but now they were coming from beneath the path. Each step I took was answered by a soft, dull thump below me, as though something enormous and hollow was walking in step with me under the stone. I tried to slow down. I couldn't. My legs weren't mine anymore. They moved with the pace, even as panic started creeping into my chest. The strip of sky above grew narrower until it was no more than a thin seam. The air was warmer here, damp like I'd stepped inside a cave, and the trees, if they were still trees, they'd changed. The trunks were smooth now, colorless, their surfaces mottled like skin. No branches, no leaves. I looked back for the first time. The shapes were closer. Their lanterns swayed at a faster clip, and even though their faces were swallowed in shadow, I could feel their attention locked on me. Not chasing, herding. That's when I realized the path had no curve anymore. It was a spiral. We weren't heading back to camp. We weren't heading anywhere I could recognize. The host stopped suddenly at a place where the stone widened into a small platform, the spiral tightening around it. He didn't turn to face me, just stood there, holding both lanterns high, their light reflecting off the slick stone in a way that made it seem impossibly deep. The knocks from below stopped. The silence pressed in hard, thick enough that my ears rang. Then the host finally spoke, his voice low but clear. "This is where the walk ends. For you." He turned, stepped to the edge of the platform, and pointed down. I followed his gaze. The stone didn't just stop. It opened into a perfect black circle, smooth as glass, swallowing all the lantern light. I couldn't tell if it was a hole or water or something else entirely, but the air above it was colder, and the smell of wet stone was stronger than ever. Something moved in that blackness. Not a ripple, not a shadow, something. And then I felt it again, that pull in my chest, stronger than before. It wanted me to step forward. I told myself not to move. I told myself that whatever was pulling at me was just in my head, some trick of fear or exhaustion or the strange rhythm of this place. But my boots slid forward anyway. Just a fraction of an inch. My muscles burned as I locked them in place, like I was pushing back against a current strong enough to sweep me off my feet. The host tilted his head, just slightly. I still couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them. Patient, waiting. Behind me, the knock started again. Not below the path this time. Closer. Heavier. I didn't dare turn around. The pull grew sharper, not like it was dragging me, but like it was reaching inside and winding something in my chest tighter and tighter. My heartbeat sped up to match it. I realized the rhythm had changed. The knocks weren't just knocks anymore. They were a count. 2, 3. The host stepped back from the platform's edge, leaving it clear. He held one lantern out toward me. Not offering it, exactly, more like signaling it was my turn to carry the light. 4. The air was colder now, streaming up from that black opening. I couldn't see more than a few inches into it, but the surface down there had texture. It glistened. 5. I could hear movement in the dark. Wet, slow, deliberate. 6. I realized my breathing had synced perfectly with the count. My chest rose and fell on cue, like I wasn't in charge of it anymore. 7. The host lowered the lantern, and for the first time I caught a glimpse of his mouth beneath the hood. His lips moved, forming words so faint they were almost carried away by the damp air. It only hurts if you fight it. 8. My foot lifted. I didn't tell it to. My knee bent, my weight shifted forward, and the pull in my chest surged like something was finally about to snap. 9. From behind me, the knocks stopped. The silence hit again, harder this time, ringing in my skull. 10. The moment my heel cleared the edge of the stone, something in that blackness surged upward. Too fast, too big, too silent. My brain couldn't process its shape, only that it was reaching for me. And in that heartbeat, I had to choose. Step forward or break the count. I broke the count. I don't even remember deciding. My body just jerked backward, my boots slamming down onto the stone path instead of over the edge. The sound that followed wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was like the world itself had been bent until it screamed, a long metallic shriek that rattled in my teeth. The lanterns along the path flickered violently, their flames stretching upward, then snapping back into darkness. For a second, I couldn't see a thing, only feel. The cold from the pit surged outward, swallowing me. The pull in my chest turned into claws, raking at my insides, trying to drag me forward even as my legs pushed me back. Then something hit the path in front of me. Hard. The impact reverberated through the stone. Whatever it was had weight, the kind of weight that makes the ground feel suddenly unreliable. When the nearest lantern sputtered back to life, I caught a glimpse. Not a face. Not a body. No, just a shape leaning up over the lip of the platform, impossibly thin yet impossibly tall, all sharp lines and wet edges. It had too many joints, bending in ways that made my stomach lurch. The host didn't move. He stood between me and it, lantern still held low, his hooded head turning slightly, not toward me, but toward the thing. And then, in that same even, careful tone, he said, "He doesn't want this one." The thing stopped. The wet sound of its movement faded, and just like that, it slid back down into the black. The pull in my chest vanished. I staggered backward, breathing hard, my knees threatening to give out. The host turned toward me. I still couldn't see his eyes. "You need to leave before the count starts again," he said quietly. I opened my mouth, but no words came. "Go," he said, this time sharper. Behind me, far down the path, the first knock sounded. 1. I didn't wait for 2. I ran. The sound of my boots on the stone was drowned out by the knocks. They were louder now. Not just behind me, around me, like the forest itself had picked up the rhythm. 2. Branches clawed at my arms and face as I plunged into the dark, leaving the path behind. I didn't care if I tripped, if I broke an ankle. Anything was better than letting that count reach 10 again. 3. It was closer. The knocks weren't footsteps, and they weren't on the ground anymore. They came from the trees, from inside their trunks, as if something hollow and enormous lived inside them. 4. I saw a lantern light ahead. My first stupid thought was that I'd somehow looped back to the host platform, that I'd been running in circles. But it wasn't a platform, it was my RV. Parked exactly where I'd left it, only now it glowed from the inside, every light on. 5. I sprinted for it, lungs burning, heart slamming. My key fob didn't work. My hands shook too much. I clawed the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut so hard the latch rattled. 6. The knocks didn't stop. They came from underneath the RV now, each one deep enough to shake the frame. 7. I fumbled for the ignition. The engine turned, sputtered, caught. Headlights washed over the trees ahead. All of them looked wrong, too straight, too uniform, standing in perfect lines. 8. The knocking turned into pounding. My teeth chattered with each hit. 9. I dropped the RV into drive and floored it. Gravel spat out behind me as I tore down the narrow road, the knocks finally starting to fade. 10. The lights in the RV went out, the engine cut, and in the rearview mirror the lanterns were back. Not just one, dozens, all swaying in perfect rhythm. The RV coasted to a stop, silent except for my breathing. I twisted the key, yanking it back and forth, but the ignition was dead. No click, No grind, nothing. Even the dashboard was black. Outside, the lanterns swayed, perfectly spaced, each casting just enough light to show the line of trees behind it. No matter how I turned my head, the distance between them never changed. I grabbed my flashlight from the counter, but when I clicked it on, the beam didn't cut through the window. It just stopped, like the glass was painted black from the outside. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, but sharp, metallic, like rust and wet earth. It seeped in through the vents, thick enough to taste. The knocks started again. One, they came from inside this time, not the floor, not the roof, the walls. Two, I spun, sweeping the flashlight across the RV's narrow aisle, the little kitchen, the bed. Everything was exactly where I'd left it, except the fridge door was open, and I hadn't touched it since yesterday morning. Three, the knocking got faster, like something was moving down the length of the RV from the bathroom toward the driver's seat. I pressed myself against the counter, flashlight trembling in my hand. Four, the bathroom door creaked, just enough for me to see darkness inside. Not the absence of light kind. This was a presence, thick and wrong, like smoke that didn't move. 5. I lunged for the driver's seat, slamming the lock on the door even though I wasn't sure it would help. My hand hit something on the steering wheel, a folded piece of paper. I didn't remember it being there. I unfolded it with shaking fingers. The handwriting was jagged, pressed deep into the paper. Just 4 words. Don't miss the count. 6. The knocking was right behind me now. I didn't turn around. 7. The metallic smell flooded the air, flat, choking, clinging to my throat. 8. Something cold brushed the back of my neck. 9. And from somewhere impossibly close, a voice I'd never heard before whispered, "This time, you finish." 10. Darkness slammed down like a lid. Not night, not just the lights going out. It was heavier than that, like the world itself had been switched off. I couldn't see my hands, couldn't even hear my own breathing. But I could feel the RV under me start to move. Not rolling forward, shifting, tipping like something enormous was lifting it from one side. My stomach lurched as the floor tilted, dishes clattering somewhere in the black. I reached for the counter to steady myself, and my hand touched skin. A hand, cold, small, fingers curling tight around mine. Before I could react, the darkness flashed just for a heartbeat, and I was standing back on the lantern-lit platform. The host was there again, smiling like we just met, holding a clipboard. "You kept the count perfectly this time," he said, his voice soft, rehearsed. "Most people don't get that far." I tried to speak, but my mouth wouldn't open. My throat was locked. He tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. "Let's see if you remember." The world blinked again, and I was back in the RV, morning light spilling through the windows, parked at a perfectly normal campsite. My phone sat on the counter. Full battery. No missed calls. It should have felt safe. But on the fridge, in thick black marker, was a note I didn't remember writing. 1, 2, 3. The numbers went all the way to 10. And under them, in smaller letters, my own handwriting, "Don't forget again." Outside, the breeze picked up. Somewhere far off in the trees, the knocks began. I left that campground before the sun was fully up. Didn't pack the chairs, didn't drain the water tank, just turned the ignition and drove until the trees gave way to highway. For a while, I thought I'd made it out. The road stretched straight and flat, the kind of open space that usually feels like freedom, but every few miles, something shifted. A mile marker with a number I didn't remember passing before. A gas station I swore I'd just seen 15 minutes ago. And always, just at the edge of my hearing, that faint metallic thud. 1, 2, 3. By the time I reached a small town, I was shaking from exhaustion. I pulled into a diner just to be around people, just to hear anything besides the count. Inside, the place smelled like burnt coffee and old wood. A waitress smiled and slid me a menu. "You look like you've been driving all night," she said. I nodded, too tired to answer, but then she glanced at my wrist and froze. "You doing some kind of challenge?" I looked down. Black ink. 10 neat tally marks across my skin. I hadn't drawn them. I don't I started, but she was already backing away. Her smile was gone. When she returned, she set the coffee down too hard. Best you keep moving, Han. Folks around here don't like when it starts over. Before I could ask what she meant, a sound rang out from somewhere deep in the diner. A hollow, deliberate knock. 1. Every head in the place turned toward me. 2. They weren't curious. They weren't concerned. They were waiting. 3. And I realized then it wasn't the campground I'd escaped. It was the rest of the world I'd driven into. There's a certain quiet you find in the wilderness, an unsettling stillness. It's the kind that creeps into the corners of your mind, hiding there, waiting. The kind of silence that, if you listen closely, might turn into something much darker. You don't hear it at first. Perhaps you're too distracted, too comfortable in your own thoughts. But after a while, it comes to you. A slight rustle, a shadow flicker, something just out of your line of sight. But the wilderness can be a liar, a deceiver. It plays tricks, pulling you in closer until one day you realize you've been caught. That's how this story starts. I never thought it'd happen to me, but it did. It was a regular evening, too regular in fact, when it all started. I'd parked my RV at a little-known spot in the Ozarks, just me and the road as usual. No signs, no crowds, just the hum of the tires against the asphalt and the soft drone of the engine. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon, and the sky was that particular shade of deep purple you only see when the world is still. There was no one around, not a single soul, and I liked it that way. It's why I came out here in the first place. I'd heard rumors, of course. Everyone who's ever camped in the US has heard the stories, right? Strange things that happen when you wander too far off the beaten path. But those were just stories, weren't they? Hikers getting lost, RVers who never made it back. Misfortune, bad luck, human error, nothing more. At least that's what I used to think. I set up camp with the usual routine, pull the awning out, set up my chair, fire up the stove, and get dinner going. The usual calm before the night falls. It was peaceful, the kind of solitude I craved. The perfect way to disconnect, to recharge. I spent the evening cooking, reading, and watching the stars come out, feeling the cool air settle in around me as the day turned into night. And then it happened. It started with a feeling, a subtle discomfort I couldn't quite place. Something was wrong, but not in any way that made sense. It was like the woods around me were watching, waiting. There was an eerie, heavy silence that replaced the usual nighttime sounds. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, just stillness. That kind of quiet you can feel in your bones. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was just being paranoid. After all, it was the kind of quiet I'd often wished for, right? But now that it was here, it felt different. Too still. I leaned back in my chair, scanning the tree line, looking for anything that might explain it. Nothing. But then, in the distance, I saw it. A light. Not the usual glow of distant campfires or a car's headlights. This was something else, flickering like a candle flame, just barely visible through the trees. It was too far to be from a neighbor's camp, and there were no other campers nearby. I would have noticed. I would have heard them. But there it was, just off in the distance, and it wasn't moving. I stood up and made my way toward it. My curiosity got the best of me. Was someone else out here? Had they been camping without me noticing? As I got closer, I could feel my heart picking up speed, my breath quickening. Something about that light felt wrong, off in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't the warmth of a campfire or the comforting glow of a lantern. No, this was something colder, more artificial. I approached the source of the light, my boots crunching the dry leaves beneath me. The trees were dense here, but the light shone through them, illuminating the forest floor. As I stepped closer, I felt an odd chill wash over me. It wasn't just the night air. It was something deeper, something colder. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the clearing ahead, just standing there. At first, I thought it might be another camper, maybe someone who'd set up a fire and forgotten to turn it off, but as I drew closer, I realized something was terribly wrong. The figure didn't move, didn't react. It wasn't human. It was not right. a tall, distorted silhouette, too tall, too stiff. Its shape flickered, almost as if it were made of shadows, twisting with every moment. I froze. Every instinct in my body told me to run, to turn around and get back to my RV. But my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't take my eyes off it. And then, without any warning, it turned. Not the way a person would turn. No, this was slow, unnatural, almost like it was gliding, its body twisting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The flickering light behind it seemed to pulse, growing dimmer with each movement, until the entire clearing was engulfed in darkness. In that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. I wasn't even in the same place anymore. Something was watching me. Something wasn't human. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I could finally move again, I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to my RV, but when I did, I locked myself inside and didn't leave until morning. But the light didn't disappear. No, it stayed with me in my thoughts. It haunted me, creeping in when I least expected it. That night changed something in me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the wilderness had eyes, that it was waiting, watching, and I wasn't the first to feel it. That's when I realized I wasn't the only one who had experienced something strange out here. Others had felt it too. Viewer stories, your wildest RV encounters. The wilderness has a way of playing tricks on the mind, turning the familiar into the unknown. People who travel far and wide, who camp in places most wouldn't dare, all have a story. A story about a time they ventured too far, encountered something they couldn't explain, and came back forever changed. And this isn't just my story. It's the story of so many others who faced the dark side of the road. Take Tom, for instance. He and his wife had been camping near the Grand Canyon, a beautiful, peaceful spot just off the main trail. They thought they had found the perfect little hideaway, secluded and quiet, the kind of place where the stars seem to fill the sky and the world feels miles away. But that quiet didn't last long. It started as a low humming sound. At first, they thought it was just the wind, or maybe an animal moving through the trees. But the hum didn't stop. It grew louder and louder. It was a deep, vibrating sound, like it was coming from beneath the ground itself. They both thought they were imagining it, but the longer they stayed, the harder it was to deny. The hum wasn't in their heads. It was real. Tom and his wife tried to ignore it, but as the days passed, the humming became harder to ignore. They found themselves looking over their shoulders more often, checking the trees for anything out of place. And then, one night, it stopped, but that didn't make them feel better. No, it was worse. When the humming ceased, they heard something else. Voices. Distant, muffled voices like they were coming from beneath the earth, whispering, calling out to them. They couldn't make out the words, but the tone sent chills down their spine. That's when they decided it was time to leave. But as they packed up, they saw something they couldn't explain. Footprints. Large, heavy footprints that led right up to their RV. The prints were fresh, and they hadn't seen anyone else in days. Tom and his wife didn't stop driving until they were hours away. To this day, they still don't know what happened out there. And then there's Sarah. She had been camping alone in the Smoky Mountains, enjoying the peace and quiet of the forest. She was used to hiking and spending time in nature, but this time, something felt off. Sarah had been in the Smoky Mountains for 3 days when she started to notice the oddities. At first, it was subtle, a rustling in the trees when there was no wind, a flash of movement from the corner of her eye. Nothing overt, nothing that screamed danger. Just little things that made her feel watched. She brushed it off, telling herself she was just being paranoid. After all, the wilderness was vast and full of strange noises. But on the 4th day, things escalated. She was sitting by the campfire when she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind her. Heavy, deliberate steps, slow but steady, like someone was approaching. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She turned, half expecting to see a fellow camper, someone she hadn't noticed before. But the clearing was empty. Nothing but trees and the darkening forest beyond. She tried to ignore it, but the unease in her chest was growing. She checked her phone, no signal. Of course, that was normal for this part of the mountains, but it only added to her growing discomfort. The shadows around her campsite seemed to stretch longer, pressing in closer with every passing minute. That's when she noticed it, the faintest sound of breathing coming from just beyond the firelight. It wasn't the deep, rhythmic breath of an animal. No, this was too slow, too deliberate. It was the kind of breath someone would make if they were trying not to be heard, trying to hide. She jumped to her feet, calling out into the darkness. "Hello? Is someone out there?" No response, just the sound of the wind whispering through the trees. Sarah, feeling her pulse quicken, grabbed the flashlight from her bag and shone it into the woods. The beam swept over the trees, illuminating only shadows and thick brush. Nothing. But then, something caught her eye. A figure, standing motionless between the trees. She couldn't make out any details, but the figure was tall, too tall. It stood rigid, unnaturally still, no movement, just there in the dark, watching her. She froze. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run, but she couldn't make her legs move. The figure didn't advance, didn't make any noise, just stood there like a dark sentinel. Suddenly, the wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the figure vanished. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone, like it had never existed. Sarah didn't wait to see if it would return. She grabbed her gear, packed up in a rush, and fled. She didn't stop until she was safely back in her car, driving down the mountain road in a daze, too shaken to think. She never went back to that part of the Smokies, not even after friends tried to convince her. The figure, the breathing, the feeling of being watched. It was all too much. Then there's Jim. Jim had been RV camping in the remote deserts of Utah, searching for solitude and a good spot to stargaze. He found just that in a little-known canyon, miles away from any towns or trails. It was the perfect place to get away from everything. No distractions, just him, his RV, and the vast emptiness of the desert sky. But one night, things didn't go as planned. Jim had been enjoying the clear sky when he noticed something strange, something out of place. A low rumble, like distant thunder, but the sky was clear. No clouds, no storms on the horizon. He shrugged it off at first, thinking it was just an odd atmospheric sound. But then it got louder and closer. Jim stepped out of his RV to investigate, and that's when he saw it. A wall of dust and sand, rising from the ground and heading straight for him. It was moving too fast for him to outrun it. The storm, whatever it was, seemed to have no end, no beginning. It wasn't like any dust storm he'd seen before. It wasn't natural. As it drew closer, the temperature dropped. The wind picked up, whipping sand into his eyes. He stumbled back to the RV, slamming the door shut just as the storm hit. The RV shook violently as the storm battered it, rattling the windows and shaking the walls. But it wasn't the storm itself that terrified Jim. It was the strange, low growl that seemed to come from inside the wind, like some ancient, hidden creature wailing from the depths of the desert. It lasted for what felt like hours before the wind suddenly stopped, the silence so profound it was deafening. Jim didn't dare open the door for a long while. When he finally did, the storm was gone, as though it had never been there. There was no sign of the dust or the noise. Just the still desert, waiting patiently as though it had always been that way. Jim couldn't explain it, and he never camped in that canyon again. These are just a few of the stories that have been shared with me over the years. Strange things happen out there, things we can't explain, things that make us question everything we thought we knew about the wilderness. But what's even stranger is that these encounters aren't isolated. They're happening everywhere, from the deepest forests to the most desolate deserts. You may think you're just going for a relaxing camping trip, just another quiet night in your RV, but the wilderness has a way of throwing you off balance. It tests you, pushing you to the edge of what you can handle. And sometimes it's not just the land that's dangerous, it's the people you meet or don't meet. There's something unnerving about the idea of running into someone who doesn't seem to belong, someone who vanishes just as quickly as they appear. But that's exactly what happened to Claire when she was camping in the remote forests of Oregon. Claire had been driving along the Oregon coast, looking for a quiet, secluded spot to rest for the night. The fog had rolled in thick and heavy by the time she found a remote campground, nestled deep in a dense forest. It wasn't on any map, but Claire had a knack for finding these hidden gems, those places just off the beaten path where she could be alone with the trees and the stars. It felt like the perfect place to park and unwind. At first, everything seemed normal. The air was damp with mist, the trees looming tall around her RV like silent sentinels. The only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze, the kind of peaceful quiet she'd been searching for. She set up her campfire, cracked open a book, and settled in for a long evening of solitude. But soon, the strange feeling crept in. It started with the light. There was something off about the way the shadows moved around her campsite. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but as the evening stretched on, it became harder to ignore. The light seemed to flicker and shift, like there was something just outside the reach of her campfire, something that was watching her. At first, she chalked it up to her own tired eyes, the deepening fog messing with her sense of perception. But then the footsteps started. They were faint at first, distant, barely audible, like someone walking on the soft forest floor. She glanced up, expecting to see another camper or perhaps a hiker passing through, but no one was there. The footsteps stopped just beyond her campsite, as if the person had come to a halt and was now watching her. Claire stood up, her heartbeat quickening. "Hello?" she called into the darkness, her voice trembling slightly. There was no answer, just the sound of her own voice echoing in the quiet. The footsteps didn't resume. It was as if whoever or whatever had been walking was now standing perfectly still, just out of sight. Claire's mind raced. Could it be someone else camping nearby? Or was she imagining things? The answer came a moment later. From the fog, a figure emerged, slowly, almost ghost-like. It was a man, dressed in tattered clothes, his face obscured by the mist. He didn't seem to notice her at first, his attention focused on the ground, his steps deliberate, dragging slightly as if he was exhausted or injured. Claire's heart skipped a beat. "Hey!" she called out again, her voice louder this time, her instincts kicking in. "Are you lost?" The man didn't respond. He just kept walking, moving toward the trees at the edge of the clearing. His pace was unnaturally slow, like he was forcing himself forward despite some unseen obstacle. Claire felt a chill run down her spine, but still she stayed where she was, watching him. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, the man stopped. He stood at the edge of the forest, turned slowly, and stared directly at her. His eyes were dark, empty, like two voids. For a long moment he didn't speak, he didn't move. Claire's pulse raced. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling now. "You need help?" The man didn't respond. Instead, he took a single step backward into the fog, vanishing into the shadows like a phantom. That's when Claire knew something was horribly wrong. The air had grown colder, heavier, and the mist seemed to thicken, crawling closer as if it were alive. She turned quickly, grabbed her flashlight, and scanned the area around her campsite. The figure was gone. The footsteps had stopped, but now, in the distance, there was a new sound. A low, guttural growl echoing through the trees. A shiver ran through her body, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't the growl of a bear or any other animal she recognized. No, this was something else, something far older and far more dangerous. Claire didn't hesitate. She grabbed her belongings, scrambled into her RV, and locked the door with shaking hands. She didn't dare to look outside again. The growling continued, circling her RV, getting closer with every passing minute. She could hear the sound of feet dragging along the forest floor, the wet slapping of something moving through the mud. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. Complete silence. But Claire knew better than to relax. She spent the rest of the night in her RV, eyes wide, staring out the windows into the foggy dark. The figure never returned, but she didn't leave until the sun was high in the sky. And even then, when she finally pulled out of the campsite, She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed, that something was still out there, watching her as she drove away. And then there's Robert's story, which is one I'll never forget. Robert had been camping in Northern California, just on the edge of the Redwood National Park. It was the kind of place where you could lose yourself in the majesty of the trees, where the air smelled rich and earthy, and the world felt ancient. Robert had been camping solo, as he usually did, taking some time away from the noise of everyday life. But one night, while walking along a familiar trail near his campsite, something caught his eye. A figure, a person standing motionless by one of the massive trees. Robert stopped in his tracks. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge him. It was just there, like a statue frozen in place. It wasn't until Robert got closer that he realized something was wrong. The figure wasn't human, at least not entirely. It had the body of a man, but its features were all wrong. Its arms were too long, its skin stretched tight over bones that looked almost skeletal. The figure stood, its head slightly cocked to the side like it was examining Robert. It had no eyes, just empty sockets, and where its mouth should have been, there was only a faint, unnatural seam of skin. Robert's heart raced, his body frozen in terror. He couldn't move, couldn't look away from the thing before him. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. But then, without any warning, the figure moved. It took a single step toward Robert, and in that instant, the sound of the forest seemed to hush. The trees, the wind, everything went silent. Robert couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every part of him told him to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. The figure stepped closer, its long fingers reaching toward him, and for the briefest moment, Robert thought it might touch him. But just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished. Gone, like a shadow swallowed by the forest. Robert didn't wait to figure out what it was. He turned and ran, not stopping until he reached his RV, locking the door behind him. These are the stories, the ones that we tell, and the ones that we don't. Strange things happen out there. People disappear, figures emerge from the fog, and the woods seem to whisper your name, calling you to stay just a little longer. But the truth is, you never really know what you're facing. The wilderness doesn't follow the rules we know. It plays by its own, and when you push too far into its depths, you might just find something that doesn't want you to leave. So the next time you set off on your own RV adventure, keep your wits about you. The world out there is vast, and though it may seem peaceful, there are things that lurk in the quiet, and sometimes those things don't want to be found. As the days pass, you start to forget. You tell yourself it's just your imagination. You convince yourself the unease was nothing more than the natural tension that comes with being alone in the wild. After all, it's supposed to be peaceful, right? Quiet, the kind of place where you can escape from the noise of the world and reconnect with yourself. But there's always that nagging doubt, isn't there? That voice in the back of your mind that tells you things aren't as they seem. I want to share one more story with you, one that didn't come from any of my viewers, but rather from someone I met in passing. A fellow camper who, for reasons I can't explain, was too afraid to ever come back to the area where his encounter happened. He had been in Wyoming, near the Teton Mountains, searching for a remote spot to camp. He told me he had been there many times before, camping, hiking, fishing, always without incident. This time, though, was different. It started with the weather. The forecast had called for clear skies, but by the time he arrived, dark clouds had begun rolling in, heavy and threatening. He didn't mind much. A little rain wouldn't hurt, right? He parked his RV at a remote site near a lake he knew well. The spot was perfect, with only the soft sound of water lapping at the shore. But as night fell, the storm didn't just bring rain. It brought an intense fog, thick and dense, like a wall of wet cotton that closed in around him. It was so thick he could barely see the front of his RV. The air grew heavy, and the smell of wet earth and decay seemed to linger in the mist. And then the sounds started. He thought at first it was the wind, but there was something rhythmic about it, like someone walking. The soft crunch of footsteps on the wet earth, approaching slowly, methodically, coming closer to his campsite. He thought maybe it was another camper, someone lost in the storm. But the more he listened, the more he realized something was off. The footsteps were too deliberate, too slow, like they were being made by someone trying to remain unnoticed, trying to avoid detection. He stood at the window of his RV, looking out into the fog, but saw nothing, just the shifting mass of white mist. His heartbeat quickened, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. And then, from the darkness, he saw it, a figure, walking slowly through the fog, the silhouette of a man. He couldn't make out any details, just a shape, a shadow. But the figure was moving with purpose, heading straight for his campsite. The man's steps were eerily precise, as though he knew exactly where he was going. As the figure neared the RV, it stopped. The silence that followed felt suffocating. There was no wind, no rain, no sound at all except for the pounding of his own pulse in his ears. He waited for what seemed like an eternity, but the figure didn't move. It stood there, just beyond the reach of his RV's lights, staring directly at the window. He couldn't see its face, but he knew it was staring back at him. Finally, in an act of desperation, he called out, his voice breaking the tension. "Who's out there?" he yelled. "Is someone lost?" No response, only the figure standing motionless in the fog. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it in the direction of the figure, but when the beam hit the spot where the figure should have been, it was empty. The man was gone, vanished into the fog, as though he'd never been there at all. But it wasn't over. As the fog slowly began to dissipate, the man's footsteps returned. This time, more hurried, more erratic. They seemed to circle the RV, moving around it in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. He could hear the crunch of leaves, the scrape of shoes on the wet ground, but no other sound. The man never spoke, never made a sound. And then, as if in answer to some unspoken question, the footsteps abruptly stopped. The fog cleared as quickly as it had come, and the night was calm again. The man was gone, and so was the tension, but the fear still lingered. He didn't sleep that night, staring out the windows into the dark woods, unable to shake the feeling that someone or something was still out there. In the morning, he packed up and left before the sun had fully risen. He never spoke of it to anyone until he met me. When he told me the story, he was shaking. And even now, years later, the fear was still palpable in his voice. He had no explanation for what happened. He couldn't say what it was, but he knew one thing for certain: he'd never return to that spot. He never felt truly safe in the wilderness again. The thing is, these stories are just a small sampling of the unsettling truths we encounter in the wilderness. Whether it's a strange figure in the fog, mysterious footsteps that don't belong to anyone, or the feeling that the trees themselves are watching you, these experiences shake us to the core. They leave marks we can't see, emotions we can't explain, and memories that never quite fade. For every campfire tale that is passed around at night, for every whisper in the woods, there's a real story behind it. A real person who faced something in the wild that can't be easily explained. And as we venture further into the unknown, we bring ourselves closer to those encounters, to the unknown things that slip between the cracks of what we understand. So the next time you head out into the wilderness, remember, it's not always as peaceful as it seems. The trees have stories, the land has secrets, and the things that move through the night, they don't always want you to know them. But maybe, just maybe, that's the part that makes it all so terrifying. And one last thing, never forget to trust your instincts. When something feels off, don't question it, don't rationalize it, just listen. Because out there in the wilderness, the things you hear, the things you feel, well, they just might be trying to tell you something. As I sit here reflecting on all the stories, something becomes clear. There's a pattern to these encounters, a thread that runs through them all, weaving a tapestry of unease and uncertainty. It's the kind of unease that sticks with you long after the campfire has died down, long after the wilderness has returned to its natural quiet. It's that feeling of being watched. It's something a lot of campers experience, but rarely talk about. The moments when you can't shake the sensation that the land around you is alive, breathing, pressing in. The feeling that something or someone is lingering just out of sight, waiting for you to turn your back. Take Laura's story, for instance. She'd been traveling with her family along the Pacific coast, seeking adventure and the kind of peace that only a coastal campsite can provide. They found a quiet spot near the cliffs, remote, away from the crowds, just the sound of the waves crashing below. Perfect, they thought. Just what they needed. For the first few nights, everything went smoothly. They set up their RV, explored the shore, and spent their evenings by the fire, watching the stars drift by. But as the third night rolled in, Laura's sense of security began to slip. It started as a flicker of doubt, small things she couldn't explain. The waves seemed louder, more ominous. The wind grew harsher, biting at her skin like an unseen hand. And the shadows in the trees, they were growing, stretching, twisting in ways that didn't seem natural. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Laura was sitting outside with her son, watching the last of the daylight fade. Her husband had gone to the nearby store, leaving them alone for a short while. That's when it started. The low hum, far off in the distance. At first, it was almost imperceptible. Laura thought it was the wind, or perhaps the distant rumble of the ocean. But as the minutes passed, the hum grew louder. Not the sound of the sea, not the wind, but something else entirely. It was deep, vibrating in her chest, like it was coming from under the ground itself. Her son noticed it too. He looked up at her, eyes wide with confusion. "What's that, Mommy?" Laura forced a smile, trying to mask her unease. "It's probably just a boat out on the water," she said, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't a boat. The hum was too constant, too unearthly. It didn't stop. It didn't ebb or fade like the wind or the ocean waves. It remained steady, almost like it was searching for something. Her son grew quiet, staring into the darkening woods with wide eyes. The trees, which had once seemed peaceful, now felt ominous. The forest seemed alive, pulsing with the hum. That's when Laura saw it. From the corner of her eye, a figure, just a shadow, really, shifted in the tree line. A man, or something that resembled a man, standing just beyond the reach of the firelight. He was tall, too tall, and his movements were slow, jerky, as though he wasn't used to moving. Laura's breath caught in her throat, and she stood up, pulling her son close. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge her presence. It simply stood there, motionless, watching. Panic gripped her chest. "Ben," she called, trying to keep her voice calm. Her husband hadn't returned yet, but she needed him. She needed him to be there with her. The figure remained still. Then, without any warning, it stepped backward into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Laura's heart was pounding in her ears, and her son clung to her side, whispering, "Mom, what was that?" She didn't know how to answer him. She didn't know what to say. All she could do was hold him tight, waiting for her husband to come back. When he did return, she didn't mention the figure. She didn't want to worry him, didn't want to sound crazy. But that night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the RV, every rustle of the trees outside sent her mind spiraling. The hum never stopped. It pulsed in the distance, deep and constant, like something was waiting. The next morning, they left. No goodbye to the campsite, no last walk along the beach. Laura couldn't explain why, but she just couldn't stay there any longer. Something about that place didn't feel right. The hum, the figure in the trees, it all left her feeling like they were never truly alone, like the wilderness was hiding something. It's not just the physical threats of the wilderness that we need to fear. The environment itself can become an enemy. The land can change, distort, shape itself into something unfamiliar, something darker. Then there's the other kind of fear, the one that creeps in when you least expect it, the kind that shows up when you're least prepared, when everything seems fine, and then it isn't. Take Tyler's story. Tyler had been traveling across the country in his RV, exploring small towns and remote areas he'd never visited before. It was a dream trip, the kind that most people only fantasize about, and he was living it. One night, he stopped in a sleepy little town in the middle of nowhere, so small, in fact, that the gas station was the only business in town. He pulled into the nearby RV park, expecting a quiet night of rest before continuing on his way. Everything seemed fine at first. The park was empty, save for one other RV parked near the back. No noise, no lights, just the quiet, open sky above and the rustling of the trees in the wind. It was peaceful, too peaceful. After a while, Tyler went outside to stretch his legs and get some fresh air. As he walked past the other RV, he noticed something strange. The door to the RV was wide open, but there was no sign of anyone inside. He looked around. No cars, no people. The park was silent, but the door was still open. He couldn't help himself. He walked up to the RV, peering inside. It was empty. But it wasn't just empty. It was untouched. The bed was made, the lights were off, everything was perfectly in place. It was as if the person who had been staying there had just vanished. Tyler shook his head, feeling the hairs on his neck stand up. He turned to leave, but stopped when he heard something, a whispering sound coming from the direction of the trees. He froze. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but as the whispering continued, he realized it wasn't the wind at all. It sounded like voices, like people speaking in hushed tones. Tyler felt the cold grip of fear settle in his stomach. He took a step back toward his RV, his mind racing. But the whispering didn't stop. It followed him, growing louder with every step he took. He could hear it now, clear as day, almost like someone was calling his name. He didn't stop to listen any longer. Tyler ran back to his RV, locked the door, and stayed inside for the rest of the night, too afraid to even check the windows. He left at first light, never looking back. These stories aren't just about encounters with strange people or things in the wilderness. They're about the fear that creeps in when you least expect it. They're about trusting your instincts when something feels off, when the silence gets too heavy, when the wilderness itself starts to feel like an adversary. It's about understanding that the unknown is never as far away as you think. It's right there, just beyond the tree line, just beyond the firelight. And you can never be too careful when you're out there. The wilderness isn't what it seems, and sometimes the scariest thing is realizing that there's no way to predict what might happen next. So, when you head out into the wild, remember, the land is not as silent as it seems. It has secrets, it has stories, and some of those stories want to be heard. Just be careful which ones you listen to. As the stories pile up, one after the other, a certain truth becomes harder to ignore. It's not just the land that changes us, it's the isolation. The deeper you go, the further off the beaten path you stray, the more you begin to lose touch with the world you know. And that's when things get strange. Things that seemed impossible when you were in the safety of civilization start to feel like they're just beyond your grasp. Sometimes it's as though the wilderness itself is a living thing, breathing and changing. It doesn't need to explain itself. It just is. Take Kurt's experience, for instance. Kurt had been on the road for weeks, driving through the vast open spaces of Nevada. He'd parked in an isolated RV park near a small town, one of those places you might drive past without a second thought. It seemed like a perfect place to rest before heading back out on the road. The park was run down. The gravel road leading in was overgrown with weeds, and the sign was barely visible under layers of dust and age. But Kurt didn't mind. The peace of being alone in a remote spot was exactly what he needed. So he parked his RV, hooked up the water and power, and settled in for the night. At first, everything felt fine. The quiet was almost therapeutic. The sky stretched on forever, the stars twinkling faintly in the distance. But as the night wore on, the air started to change, subtly at first. A strange tension filled the atmosphere, like the stillness was pressing in from all sides. Kurt couldn't explain it, but it felt like something was waiting, watching. Around midnight, he decided to take a walk. He left his RV, locking the door behind him, and started down the gravel path toward the far end of the park. The path was dark, with only the light from the RV park's fading lamps guiding him forward. It wasn't until he reached the edge of the park that he saw it, something just beyond the fence. At first, it was just a flicker, a brief movement in the shadows, but then he saw it clearly. A figure standing in the distance. It was tall, unnaturally tall, in fact. Its limbs were long, thin, and twisted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Kurt's heart stopped for a moment, and he froze in place. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching him. Kurt wanted to call out, to ask if someone else was there, to break the silence. But his voice caught in his throat, and he couldn't bring himself to speak. The figure's eyes, if it even had eyes, were dark, empty, like two black holes staring straight at him. The air felt heavier with every second he stood there, like the weight of the wilderness was pressing down on him. For what seemed like an eternity, they just stared at each other. Kurt felt his breath quicken, his hands trembling at his sides. But then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure turned and walked into the shadows, disappearing behind the trees. It didn't make a sound, didn't leave a trace. One moment, it was there, and the next, it was gone. Kurt didn't wait around to see if it would return. His instincts kicked in, and he turned, running back to his RV as fast as he could. He didn't even look back. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every creak of the RV, every gust of wind against the windows had him on edge. The figure haunted him, its image burned into his mind. He didn't know what he had seen, but he didn't want to find out. The next morning, Kurt packed up and left before sunrise. He didn't speak to anyone in the small town nearby. He just drove as far as he could until the unsettling feeling started to fade. But he knew, deep down, that he'd never forget that night. What is it about the wild that makes us confront things we can't understand? It's as though nature itself has a way of testing us, of showing us parts of ourselves we're not prepared to face. And sometimes it's not just the environment that's unsettling, it's the people. The ones you think you can trust, the ones who seem harmless at first until they aren't. Take Amy's story. She had been camping in the Adirondacks, a place she knew well. She'd camped there many times, enjoyed the solitude of the forest, and appreciated the beauty of the mountains. But on this trip, things were different. She had pulled into a small, off-the-grid campsite. The area was known for its secluded spots, and Amy was looking forward to a few days of peace. There was just one other RV parked at the far end of the lot when she arrived. The couple in the RV seemed friendly enough, and they waved as she passed by. For the first day, everything was fine. She spent her time hiking, taking in the views, enjoying the quiet. But on the second evening, after the sun had set, Amy started to feel the weight of the silence. The kind of silence that makes you uneasy, makes you question whether there's something not being said. Around dusk, she noticed something strange. The couple in the RV had disappeared. Their door was wide open, but there were no lights on inside, no movement. It was like they had just vanished. Amy figured they had gone for a hike or a walk, but as the hours passed, she began to feel uneasy. The forest had become quieter, the shadows longer. There was a strange tension in the air, a feeling that something was wrong. She decided to check on the couple, just to make sure everything was okay. As she approached their RV, she saw something that stopped her cold. A pile of their belongings, bags, food, personal items, was scattered outside, as if they had left in a hurry. Amy called out, but there was no response. She knocked on the door, but it didn't open. She felt a chill in her bones. Something wasn't right. And then she heard a sound behind her, a faint rustling in the trees. She spun around, but saw nothing. Nothing but the thick, dark woods surrounding her. But as she turned back to the RV, she saw something that made her heart race. A figure, standing at the edge of the trees. The same figure that had been in the campsite when she arrived, only this time it was staring directly at her. She couldn't explain why, but she knew it wasn't the couple. Something was wrong. Something had happened. Without thinking, Amy turned and ran. She didn't stop until she was safely back in her own RV, locking the door behind her. The rest of the night passed in a blur of unease, but the silence outside was deafening. She left at first light, not looking back, and never returned to that campsite again. When you're out there in the wilderness, you realize something. There's a thin line between safety and danger. And sometimes it's not the obvious threats you need to watch out for. It's the things that hide in plain sight, the ones that you don't see coming until it's too late. The next time you set out on a camping trip, whether it's a quiet retreat or a grand adventure, keep your wits about you. The land can be beautiful, but it's also unpredictable. It can lure you in, make you feel safe, and then turn on you without warning. And sometimes the strangest things are the ones that are hardest to explain. The wilderness doesn't always play fair. It doesn't owe you anything. So when you're out there, remember, you're never really alone. And whatever it is that's lurking just beyond the trees, it's watching you, waiting. As the days go by, something strange begins to settle in. A new kind of awareness that takes hold of you, creeping into your thoughts when you're least expecting it. It's that subtle feeling, the one that makes you check the rearview mirror one too many times, or glance over your shoulder as you step out of your RV. The kind of awareness that makes you question every sound, every flicker of shadow. That's what happened to Jason, a seasoned camper who'd been on the road for years. He'd seen it all, or so he thought. But this particular trip was different. He'd parked his RV at a quiet, remote campground in the Sierra Nevada, far from any nearby town. The kind of place most people wouldn't even know existed unless they stumbled upon it by accident. The first night was just as he'd hoped, quiet, peaceful. The only sound was the wind rustling through the pine trees, the only light coming from the fire he'd built to warm himself as the temperature dropped. But as he sat by the fire, a strange sensation started to grow. It was subtle, like a cold chill brushing against the back of his neck. He ignored it at first, chalking it up to the isolation, the quiet of the forest. But then he started hearing things. Soft, rustling noises just beyond the reach of his campfire. At first, it was the wind, but the sound didn't match the trees. It was too deliberate, too close. Someone or something was moving in the woods, just out of sight. Jason tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a deer or a small animal scurrying through the underbrush. But the sound didn't stop. It didn't fade into the distance. It lingered, just out of reach, like something was pacing around his campsite, waiting for him to notice. His heart started to race. The forest, once so peaceful, now felt wrong. The trees seemed to close in, and the shadows lengthened unnaturally, shifting in ways they shouldn't. The rustling grew louder, closer. Jason stood up, his mind racing. "Hello?" he called out, his voice too loud in the sudden silence. There was no answer, only the whispering sound of the wind through the branches. He grabbed his flashlight and swept it across the trees, his pulse quickening. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but the thick woods. But then he saw something. Movement, just at the edge of the light. A figure. It was tall, its outline barely visible against the dark trees. It stood still, unmoving like a shadow made flesh. Jason's breath caught in his throat. The figure didn't speak, didn't move. It just watched. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. He stood frozen, the beam of the flashlight trembling in his hand. And then, without warning, the figure vanished. It didn't fade into the trees. It didn't retreat. It just disappeared as if the woods had swallowed it whole. Jason didn't wait to see if it would return. He grabbed his gear, threw everything into the RV in a panic, and started the engine. His hands were shaking as he pulled out, his eyes darting around the dark woods, half expecting to see the figure standing at the edge of his campsite, watching him leave. The forest had changed in an instant. What had once felt like a peaceful haven now felt like a prison. The shadows had become too thick, too oppressive. The quiet had turned into something suffocating. Jason didn't stop until he reached the nearest town. hours away. He parked at a gas station, still shaking, still unable to shake the image of that tall, dark figure. He never returned to that campsite, never spoke about it to anyone, not even his closest friends. But the fear lingered, following him wherever he went. The woods were never the same. The thing about these stories is that they don't just come from isolated, unknown places. They come from everywhere, from towns and forests you've driven past 100 times without giving them a second thought, from the places you've come to trust because they're familiar. And that's the trick, isn't it? When things feel too familiar, when everything seems too easy, that's when you need to be the most cautious. It's like the time I met Paul. He'd been RV camping with his wife near the Great Smoky Mountains, a place he'd visited countless times. It was a familiar spot. He knew it like the back of his hand. He was looking forward to a few days of hiking, fishing, and relaxation away from the hustle of everyday life. But something wasn't right that trip. Something he couldn't shake. It started on the second day when they were out on a hike. They had been following a well-trodden path, one Paul had walked many times before. The trail led them to a small clearing, the kind of place that felt peaceful, tucked away from the rest of the world. But when they stopped to rest, that's when it happened. They heard something. At first, it was faint, just a soft noise, like someone moving through the brush. But then it grew louder. It wasn't the sound of a hiker, not the crunch of leaves underfoot. This was different, heavy, deliberate, like someone was walking just outside the clearing, trying to remain unseen. Paul called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. Just the noise growing louder, circling them like some invisible predator. The air felt thick, charged with something Paul couldn't name. He looked around, his mind racing, trying to rationalize it. Was it another hiker? A bear? Maybe a deer? But then he saw something. Movement, just at the edge of the trees. A figure. It was tall. Too tall, and its shape seemed off, like it was bending in unnatural ways. The figure stepped forward and Paul's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't human, not fully anyway. It was distorted, shifting in the light like something from a nightmare. Before he could react, the figure vanished back into the trees, leaving behind nothing but silence. Paul and his wife didn't wait. They packed up their things quickly, scrambling back to the RV. The eerie feeling lingered, following them as they drove away from the mountains, away from the campsite. They never spoke about what happened again. But Paul never returned to that spot. He couldn't. The fear, the strangeness of it all had taken something from him. And from that moment on, every shadow in the woods, every creak of a tree seemed to whisper the same thing. You're not safe here. There's something unsettling about the way the wilderness seems to fold in on itself. It's like a mirror, showing you something you'd rather not see. We all go into the woods, into the unknown, looking for something, peace, adventure, maybe even solitude. But what we don't realize is that the wilderness is alive. It has its own pulse, its own heartbeat. And when you least expect it, it will remind you that you're never as alone as you think. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you this because it's the truth. The wilderness isn't some gentle paradise waiting for you to enjoy it. It's unpredictable. It's powerful. And sometimes it's downright terrifying. So the next time you go camping, remember this. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Don't rationalize it. Just leave. Because out there in the wild, things happen that don't always make sense. And sometimes you don't get a second chance to leave. As time passes, you start to notice something you never paid much attention to before. The landscape around you begins to shift. Not physically, but emotionally. When you first pull into a campground or a remote spot by the side of the road, everything seems calm. The rustling trees, the distant calls of birds, the faint hum of the wind. It's peaceful, serene, almost inviting. But as the days pass, the surroundings start to feel different. They press in on you, subtly at first, then with a weight you can't ignore. That's exactly what happened to Nancy. She was an experienced camper, used to the quiet solitude of national forests and out-of-the-way campgrounds. But the last trip she took was different. She'd chosen a site along the Black Hills in South Dakota, far off the well-trodden trails. It seemed perfect, isolated, pristine, and quiet. It was the kind of spot that drew her in. The trees were thick, the air fresh, and the sky stretched on for miles. It was exactly the kind of place she had been searching for to disconnect and find peace. The first night passed without incident. Nancy made dinner, built a small fire, and watched as the sun dipped below the horizon. She could hear the occasional rustle of leaves, the soft murmur of the wind against the trees. There was something calming about it. But by the second night, something began to change. It wasn't the sounds. Not at first. It was the feeling. By the second evening, as Nancy sat by the fire, the air seemed to grow heavier, thicker. It wasn't the chill of the night creeping in. It was something else, something unnameable. She couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching her. She turned her head sharply, convinced she saw a shadow dart between the trees, but when she looked, it was gone. It happened again the next night. She was sitting outside minding her own business when a noise caught her attention. A faint, muffled sound, like a footstep on soft earth, just beyond the firelight. She stood, calling out into the dark. "Hello? Who's there?" No response. The woods were still. Nancy shook her head, trying to shake off the unease that was creeping up her spine. She told herself it was nothing, a trick of the mind. But it wasn't long before the sensation intensified, the feeling that she wasn't alone, that the trees were no longer just trees, that the shadows were no longer just shadows. On the fourth night, as she lay in her RV trying to sleep, the sounds grew louder. At first, it was a soft scratching at the side of the camper. She thought it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or some other nocturnal creature. But then the scratching stopped, replaced by something else. A knock. Soft, deliberate, like someone gently tapping at the door. Nancy froze. Her breath caught in her throat. There was no one around. She was alone. She didn't know what to do. She didn't want to open the door, but she couldn't ignore it either. After what felt like hours, the knocking stopped, and silence returned to the campsite. She didn't sleep that night. Every sound, every crack of a twig sent her heart racing. Every movement outside, every breeze that brushed against the RV made her skin crawl. The next morning, when she finally worked up the courage to step outside, the campsite seemed different. The trees loomed taller than before, their branches twisting in strange directions. The air felt thick with tension, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. That's when Nancy noticed something else, the footsteps. Deep impressions in the soil, leading from the edge of the woods to the side of her RV. But there were no animal tracks, no signs of deer or other creatures. These were human-sized, heavy prints, large and wide, as if someone had been walking around her campsite. Nancy didn't wait around. She packed her things quickly, got in her RV, and drove away without looking back. To this day, she can't explain what happened out there. The feeling, the sounds, the marks on the ground, they've stayed with her, and she hasn't returned to the Black Hills since. It's strange, isn't it? How the places we think we know, the places we feel safest, can turn on us without warning. We think we understand the land, the way the wind blows, the way the trees sway, the way the silence settles in at night. But sometimes the wilderness has a way of showing us that we don't know anything at all. That's what happened to Rick, a longtime RV traveler who had been camping near the redwoods in Northern California. He had set up camp at a quiet spot, tucked between two giant redwood trees, far from the hustle and bustle of the tourist-filled areas. It was the perfect place to escape and enjoy some peace and quiet. Rick had always loved the redwoods, the sense of awe they inspired. But this trip was different. It started out the same as any other, setting up his RV, going for a short hike, and enjoying the beauty of the towering trees. But on the second night, things began to change. At first, it was small, just a strange rustling sound, as if something was moving in the underbrush. Rick figured it was a raccoon or some other small creature. But then the sound grew louder. It wasn't the usual sounds of wildlife. It was something heavier, like the steps of something much larger moving closer to his camp. He brushed it off at first, thinking it was a deer or a bear passing through. But as the hours went on, the noise didn't stop. It circled his campsite, getting closer, as if something was watching him. Rick tried to shake it off. He told himself it was just his mind playing tricks. But when he stepped outside to check, that's when he saw it. A figure standing just beyond the edge of the trees. It was tall, unnaturally tall. Its outline was vague, but it was clear it wasn't human. The figure stood perfectly still, staring at him through the trees, its body blending into the shadows. Rick's blood ran cold. He didn't move, didn't say a word. He just stood there, unable to tear his eyes away. The figure didn't move either. It just watched. And then, as quickly as it appeared, the figure disappeared back into the trees. Rick didn't sleep that night. He didn't even go outside until the sun came up. When he did, he found deep, unnatural footprints around his campsite, prints that were too large to be from any animal he knew. They were fresh, the ground still soft from the night's rain. Rick left that morning, and he never returned to that part of the redwoods again. As much as we want to believe the wilderness is just a place of peace, it's also a place of unpredictability. It's a place where the familiar can turn strange in the blink of an eye, where shadows can take on new forms, and where things you can't explain might be waiting just out of sight. So the next time you head out on your journey, remember to trust your instincts. Listen to the silence around you. The wilderness can be a beautiful place, but it's also full of mysteries that may not always be safe to uncover. And always remember, you're never truly alone out there, even when you think you are. There's something about the silence that's unnerving, isn't there? At first, it feels like a relief. The absence of noise, the stillness of the night, the way the world seems to slow down when you're camping. It feels peaceful until it doesn't, until that silence becomes too deep, too thick, like it's pressing in on you from every direction. That's what happened to Ben when he and his partner Emily decided to camp in the middle of nowhere in Montana. They wanted to get away from everything. No cell service, no distractions, just them, the vast open landscape, and the stars overhead. At first, everything was perfect. They set up their RV near a small, secluded lake, surrounded by nothing but endless grasslands and the occasional tree. It was serene, almost like they had the whole world to themselves. But it wasn't long before the quiet started to feel different. By the second night, something shifted. The usual sounds of the wilderness, the calls of birds, the rustle of leaves in the breeze were gone. There was nothing, no movement in the trees, no animal sounds in the distance, just an eerie, suffocating silence. It was the kind of quiet that made your ears ring, like the world was holding its breath. Ben had been used to quiet places, but this felt wrong. It was too still, too oppressive. Emily, too, began to feel the weight of it. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her gaze darting to the edges of their campsite, as though she expected something or someone to appear at any moment. On the third night, they decided to take a walk around the lake. It was dark, the moonlight barely enough to see by, but they thought it might help to stretch their legs and break the unsettling tension. As they walked along the shore, Ben noticed something odd. There were no tracks in the mud. No signs of animals, no footprints. Nothing at all. Weird, he muttered, kicking a small stone into the water. Normally you'd see tracks around a lake like this, right? Emily nodded, but she didn't seem convinced. She had this look in her eyes, one that made Ben pause. It wasn't just the silence, it was something deeper. She stopped walking, staring out at the water, her face pale. I feel like we're being watched, she said, her voice low. It's like something is just waiting for us to turn around. Ben laughed nervously. It's just your imagination. We're out here in the middle of nowhere. But even as he said it, a shiver ran down his spine. The air felt too thick, too heavy with that unnatural quiet. He turned around, scanning the trees behind them. The forest was dark, the shadows stretching long and foreboding. That's when they heard it. A sound so faint, so soft at first that it might have been mistaken for the wind. but then it grew louder, clearer. A faint tapping, a rhythmic knock, like someone tapping at a door. Ben froze. "Did you hear that?" Emily nodded, her face pale. "Where is it coming from?" It wasn't coming from the RV. It wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from the water. Ben turned slowly, his breath catching in his throat as he looked out over the lake. At first, he couldn't see anything, just the moonlight shimmering on the water, but then something moved, something long, dark, and twisted, rising from beneath the surface. It was tall, too tall. Its shape was almost human, but distorted. The water seemed to ripple and shift around it like it was alive. Ben felt his heart race as the thing, whatever it was, rose higher, its surface glistening with dark, slimy tendrils stretching out of the water like fingers. Before Ben could even react, the tapping stopped, replaced by an unsettling deep hum that filled the air. It wasn't a sound made by any animal he knew. No bird, no insect. Just the hum. Low, vibrating, like it was coming from deep within the earth itself. The silence that followed was suffocating. The moment stretched on, taut with dread. Emily's hand gripped his arm tightly. "We need to go. Now." Ben didn't argue. He didn't have to. His legs moved before he could think, pulling her back toward the RV. They didn't stop until they were inside, the door slammed shut behind them. The hum lingered outside, vibrating through the walls of the RV. And then, silence. The same suffocating silence that had settled over them before. Ben couldn't sleep. Neither could Emily. They lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and groan of the RV, as if something was trying to get in. At dawn, they didn't pack up slowly. They didn't take their time. They left in a rush, not looking back, not saying a word. They didn't speak about what happened, not even to each other. It was as if the experience had broken something between them, a shared understanding that they both felt but neither wanted to voice. It's strange how some places leave a mark on you. You visit them, you stay for a night or two, and then you leave. But the memory lingers. It stays with you, following you back into the world you thought was normal. It's the feeling that something isn't quite right, that the wilderness is a world of its own, one that we don't fully understand. And the more we try to understand it, the more we realize that there are things out there, things we can't explain, things we can't outrun. They don't belong to the world we know. They exist just outside of it, waiting for us to find them. It's not always the obvious things we need to worry about. It's not always the creatures we know, the dangers we've been taught to fear. No. Sometimes it's the quiet, the stillness, the things that move just out of sight. And maybe that's the most terrifying thing of all. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know what's out there waiting for you in the dark. As you prepare for your next journey, there's always that underlying thought, the one that lingers in the back of your mind. You can't shake it. It's the thought that creeps in when you're packing your gear, when you're starting your engine, and when you pull into that next campground. It's the thought of the unknown. And no matter how many trips you've taken, no matter how many nights you've spent beneath the stars, the wilderness always has a way of reminding you that there's more to it than meets the eye. That's exactly what happened to Hannah. She had been camping for years, so she wasn't one to get easily rattled. But this trip, this one, was different. Hannah had taken a solo camping trip to the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. She had heard the stories. Everyone had. Strange things happen in that forest. People get lost, disappear, and some even say the trees there are more than just trees. But Hannah wasn't worried. She'd been to the peninsula before. She knew the forest, or at least she thought she did. She had set up camp near the Hoh Rainforest, a spot that was known for its towering trees and lush, moss-covered ground. It was beautiful, the kind of place that made you feel like you were stepping into another world. The air smelled fresh, like rain and pine, and the silence was almost deafening. She had the whole campsite to herself, and that was how she liked it. But by the second night, things started to feel off. The silence was too deep. The forest was too still, and the trees, those ancient towering trees, felt too close, as though they were leaning in, watching her. At first, she thought it was just the isolation getting to her. She had been alone for days, after all. But the more time she spent in the forest, the more she realized that something about it wasn't right. On the third night, as Hannah was sitting by her campfire, she heard it. A rustling sound. At first, it was faint, just a whisper of movement in the underbrush. She glanced around, half expecting to see a deer or some other animal moving through the trees. But there was nothing. Only the shadows, thick and dark, stretching across the forest floor. The rustling continued. It was soft at first, like the wind moving through the leaves, but then it grew louder. It wasn't just the wind, it was footsteps. Someone or something was walking through the forest, just outside her campsite. Hannah's heart began to race. She stood up, scanning the trees. "Hello," she called, her voice shaky. "Is someone there?" Nothing. No response. Only the sound of the wind, or what she thought was the wind. She stood frozen for a moment, straining her ears. The footsteps stopped. She waited, but nothing moved. Then, out of nowhere, she heard a whisper. A voice, soft and distant, like it was coming from the trees themselves. The words were indistinct, but there was no mistaking the tone. It was calling her name. Hannah. Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure if she'd heard it clearly or if her mind was playing tricks on her. But the more she listened, the clearer it became. It was her name, a soft whisper calling from the dark woods. Hannah. Her legs froze. It was impossible. She was alone. She had seen no one for days, but the voice, the whisper, it sounded too real. She grabbed her flashlight and scanned the trees. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the thick trunks, the moss hanging from the branches. But there was nothing, no movement, no sign of anyone. The whisper came again, louder this time, like it was right behind her. Hannah. It sounded almost like a breath, like the forest itself was exhaling her name. Like she spun around, the flashlight trembling in her hand, but there was nothing, just the dense, shadowy forest. That was when the real fear began to set in. The air around her felt heavy, thick with something she couldn't name. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches creaking as if they were reaching for her. The forest was alive with sound now, but it wasn't the usual sounds of nature. No. It was something else, something darker. The whisper came again. Only now it wasn't just her name. It was a low, guttural tone, like something was trying to speak, but the words were too distorted, too garbled to understand. It was calling to her, beckoning her. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to get in the RV and drive away. But something held her there. It was like the forest was pressing in on her, making it impossible to move. The whispering stopped, and the silence was even worse. It felt like the whole world had gone still, as though everything in the forest was waiting. And then, as if the forest itself had had enough, the sound returned. A crackling deep in the trees, like something was moving. Something huge, something powerful, something not of this world. She turned, running back toward her RV, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She threw herself inside, locking the door with shaking hands. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The rustling started again, this time closer. It was as if something was circling her, walking around the RV, moving in a deliberate pattern. Every now and then she heard it, the whisper, faint but clear, coming from just outside the door. Hannah, she didn't sleep that night. She didn't even dare look out the windows. The fear was too overwhelming. Every sound, every movement sent her heart into overdrive. By morning, she didn't waste any time. She packed up her things, started the RV, and left before the sun had fully risen. She didn't stop until she was miles away, and even then, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her. The memory of the whispering voice, the name it called, stayed with her for days. Sometimes it's not the creatures or the sounds that we can explain that scare us the most. It's the things we can't understand, the things that stay just out of reach. We know they're there, just beyond our sight, but we don't know what they are or what they want. That's the scariest thing about the wilderness. It doesn't care if you're prepared. It doesn't care if you've been camping for years. It can always find a way to make you question everything you thought you knew. And no matter how many times you venture out into the wild, there's always that quiet fear, that feeling that something is out there, just waiting for you to listen. So when you go camping next, just remember, the wilderness doesn't always follow the rules you think it does. And sometimes you might find that what you're really afraid of isn't the trees, the animals, or even the shadows. It's something much older, something that's been watching long before we ever thought to step foot in its world.